suspended before lunch, the Honourable Member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and Salvador had reserved the floor. The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I take this opportunity to, as usual, thank my constituents of Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador for the continued confidence they repose in me, and to thank them for giving me the opportunity to serve not only them in particular, but the country in general. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to join in the condolences expressed earlier in respect to several of our distinguished citizens who passed recently. In particular, I wish to pay tribute to Mr. Carver Grant and to convey my condolences to Ronnie and the children, and of course the member for Elizabeth, whose uncle Carver is. I met Carver Grant when I lived in Grand Bahama. Well, first of all, I met him before I started to live there. But when I went down there as a member of Toastmasters to form the club, the first club in Toastmasters down there, 1425, of which he became a founding member. And we developed a relationship then, and that continued for many, many years. And though we did not see each other often, whenever we did see, the kindred spirit that we developed during that sojourn in the Toastmasters program was still alive and well. He was a quiet gentleman who carried himself well and was quite a contributor to the community in Grand Bahama. I'm sure his wife Ronnie and his daughter, Dr. Ilse Grant, who I have the privilege of worshiping with every Sunday, I convey my heartfelt condolences to that family. Also, Mr. Speaker, Darlington Butler, who was passed. Of course, he has roots in Cat Island, roots in Rumkey. Mother was from Rumkey, father from Cat Island. And of course, he was my MP back in the late 60s when he represented the Salem constituency. And as a young boy, I can recall my father, along with the Senator Dabo's father, leading us young boys out to listen to the cries of the people then when the Ali ran. And I wish him Godspeed as he traversed the Jordan to his just reward. And again, Speaker, Ronnie Butler, the iconic musical icon, as I said, of the Bahamas. And again, someone who's very familiar to me. He brought much joy to my life. I spent many a nights in Nassau Beach, Rum Keg, Ronnie's Rebel Room, all over the place. And he brought much joy, laughter to my life. And his mother was very close to my mother. I think they were related when they lived in Culmuswood. And my brother and he developed such a friendship. My brother, Trevor, who promotes music through Alpha Sound, he was one of those who was there for him in his latter years, which I think my mother would have been proud of, to see what he would have been doing for Ronnie in these years. And Ronnie may have been quieted by death, but I can say his melody lives on in all of us. Speaker, I listened very attentively to the side opposite in respect to their characterization of this bill called the Commercial Enterprises Bill. And however they may now seek to position that bill, when I consider the bill, what we have before us, a lot of things come to mind. A very distinguished Bahamian, Calvin Knowles, who served this country well and now retired, reminded me very recently that there is a distinction between the PLP and the FNM. And he attempts always to this adjourn to try to demonstrate what that distinction is. Over the years, in my estimation, the distinction has become blurred. So you'll find a lot of PLPs are now in the PLP, in the FNM, because they have not gotten to appreciate the distinction, and the distinction still remains. The distinction still remains. It's become blurred, Mr. Speaker, not because the differences no longer remain. And I say this to my PLP brothers who are now in the FNM and holding seats in this parliament in the name of the FNM. I say to you, the differences still remain. But because of political rhetoric and sound bites that seek to distract us from keeping our fundamental differences in view, that is what has happened. Political rhetoric and sound bites keeps us blinded from the fundamental differences that there and has buried those differences in the eyes and minds of many. And the same distinguished Bahamian, Calvin Knowles, drew to my attention and reminded me of something that was said on the 2nd of November 1997 by Sir Lyndon Fiddling. I was reminded just before we started to remind the nation that, look, he was not the longest serving member of this parliament, but rather it was Roland Simmons. He had 51 years, I think, and I accept that. And he was the first premier under a constitutional self-governing Bahamas. I accept that as well. Sir Lyndon, nevertheless, was the founding father of the modern Bahamas. I think that is acceptable. He had this to say when we reflected on the differences of the philosophy between us and them. And the philosophy of the PLP is progress and advancement. And this is how this bill is being posited by the government, that this is about progress and advancement. Now here is what I'm saying. And here you will find the distinction between us and them. And Sir Lyndon summed it up properly. He said the philosophy of the PLP is progress in advancement. But he says that it has to be in harmony with the protection of the rights, value, and dignity of the Bahamian people. He went on to say that the process, very important, that the process by which these are achieved is as important as the end. Because the means, that is the process, determines the quality of the end. He summed up the bottom line by saying, this is what he said in 97. The dignity is more important than the dollar, and people are as important as profit. That's what he's saying. That is the philosophy of PLP. And in contrast, those opposites, or the FNM then. He said the FNM's philosophy is progress and advancement, but at the cost and expense of the identity, the dignity, value, worth, and prosperity of the Bahamian people. Hence the sale of our birthright for a bowl of porridge. That's what he said. Now, I don't ask you all to agree with what I'm saying, or what I am now adopting as what is today. I'm just putting how I perceive this bill to be. And I hope I can demonstrate and persuade you that that's what it is. That is why I had asked earlier to pause. I had wished that we had paused on this so that we can have a more fruitful and meaningful dialogue on what they are intended to do. Mr. Speaker, he went on to say, this philosophy is based on the principle that the end justifies the means and renders the process more important than the results, and the profit more important than the people. Mr. Speaker, let me just reiterate what was said by the member of Zuma, Keys, and Ragged Island. We on this side support any initiative that will improve our ability to accommodate or facilitate the conduct of business in the Bahamas. It is no secret that the environment for business in the Bahamas today is too complex. When the proposals for change are specifically geared towards circumventing the guides of national security and has little regard for the disenfranchisement of our people, we must challenge it, and they will be. Sir Lyndon's word then in 1977 was a very appropriate intervention then, and it can be applied here today, as though the words were spoken in the context of the Commercial Enterprises Bill. This is a clear effort to sell our birthright, our patrimony, for a bowl of porridge. Mr. Speaker, yesterday, the Prime Minister released a press statement concerning this bill. It read, the legislation seeks to build a stronger and more stable economy by A, encouraging both domestic and foreign investment in the Bahamas, B, creating economic zones where deemed necessary throughout the country, C, targeting specialized businesses in captive insurance, computer technology, software, design, data storage, maritime trade, aviation registration, wealth management, and manufacturing. He lists 9 specialized businesses. But when you look at the schedule, you have 19. D, fostering an economic environment that will help to lead to higher paying jobs, more job security, and long-term employment for Bahamians, and helping the country to better compete globally. This is what he said in his press release. The Commercial Enterprise Bill will help to encourage investment in the Bahamas and places a high level of prioritization on Bahamian labor and talent. Place high level of prioritization on Bahamian labor and talent. Companies wishing to do business in the Bahamas must be encouraged through policy and legislation to make an investment in training of Bahamians to do jobs at all levels in various enterprises. The legislation is part of the government's broader economic agenda for economic growth and jobs which includes various project investments, which will be announced when they are finalized. Mr. Speaker, I think this government has, I'm very convinced that this government has severely underestimated the depth to which the Bahamian people can think. Every day, it becomes more and more obvious that the government seeks to climb slippery slopes in flip-flops. When we look at the objects and reasons of the actual bill, and we have been admonished by at least two speakers opposite to look at this bill as an immigration bill. It has nothing to do with immigration. It has to do with, I suspect, what was being said in the press release by the Prime Minister. But obviously, the Prime Minister, this government is clearly out of step with their draft persons. How could they tell us that the object of this bill has nothing to do with immigration? How could they, when their draft persons, and I draw attention to all of you here to look at what the objects and reasons the bill is saying. How could you ask us not to? Ask the Bahamian people not to look at this in the context of the liberalization of work permits, when your own draft persons, the document that you put before us, the document to which you asked us to vote for, which we are not going to vote for, speaks to this bill, this bill seeks to, and I don't want anyone to believe I'm trying to obfuscate anything. What it's saying, this bill seeks to liberalize the granting of work permits to an enterprise that wishes to establish itself in the Bahamas and requires work permits for its management team and key personnel. So what is the bill about? If it ain't about liberalization of work permits, why would it be written in the document? Why is it here? The government has to be honest with what they're doing and to say what the bill is truly about. I'm waiting to hear how this country is going to be helped to better able to compete globally. I'm waiting to hear how fostering an economic environment that will be helped to lead to higher paying jobs. I'm waiting to hear that the creation of economic zones were deemed necessary throughout the country, and whether that will be about designating areas and parcels of land that will increase its value, and we know who the landowners are in this country, right? We know, right? So we need to understand how this bill encourages both domestic and foreign investments in the Bahamas. Right? And so, given the fact, Mr. Speaker, that Bahamians do not, see, when we say Bahamians do not need work permits, I mean, if you're going to establish a business, a small business, capitalizing it at about $250,000, I'm a Bahamian. What do you think I can need a work permit for? Even if I need a work permit, why do I need this bill? I could today, without this bill, set up any of these businesses with the capital that they're suggesting, and if I need a work permit, apply for it. Right? And Mr. Speaker, given the fact, as I said, that the Bahamians do not need work permits, I question which Bahamians will benefit from legislation that will liberalize the granting of work permits. You see, Mr. Speaker? In fact, the bill tends to perhaps restrict now Bahamians. Instead of expanding opportunities for Bahamians, listen, you understand what I'm saying? If you're saying this bill, when passed, could restrict Bahamians' opportunities. Why? When you look at the proposed amendments to the definition, because the first definition, it wasn't clear whether you're talking about Bahamians or non-Bahamians. In the proposed amendments, you're thinking of moving any cap for capitalization for a Bahamian who wants to operate in what is called the economic zone or enterprise zone. Right? Now, today, I could set up any business without regard to capital anywhere in the Bahamas, subject only to zoning by town planning. They might say, well, you can't build that there because of town planning zoning. But now, as a Bahamian, I can't only worry about town planning zoning. I got to worry about what the minister say. Because if I am not operating within the specified commercial enterprise zone, I can't enter into the business. That's what it's saying. Unfortunately, if that's not what intended, I see, if it's not intended, please look at the language of the proposed amendment. Look at what section 4 says, because this bill is related to a specified commercial enterprise may conduct business from any location in the Bahamas subject to zoning ordinances. So if there's no zoning ordinances, I have a challenge. That's 4.2. And what I'm saying is that this may not be intended. This is why I think we should have taken some more time. This is not what you may have intended, but this is what is being read. This is what I'm reading from the bill. And so, Mr. Speaker, pardon me? I never said okay, but now. That's not what I'm saying. No. I'm saying this is not okay, and the message in the whole bill is not okay now or never. Because we are now on the issue of the work permits. What this bill also does, as I indicated when I attempted to ask for time, it removes consideration of whether local skills are available. Right now, the policy has been that before you grant a work permit, you get a labor certificate, you then search the market to determine whether there are available Bahamians to do the job. That is no longer the case under this bill. Because under this bill, once I am issued the enterprise certificate, once I get the certificate, I then tell you who I want to bring in. I can tell you these are the persons, my in-house professionals, and I don't know that that means my engineers if I need engineers. That means maybe my professional human resources personnel. That my private physicians, once they're working for me as a doctor, they'll have that, without regard to whether they could find these skills here. That's the way the Act is reading, Mr. Speaker. And what is more challenging, and if I could point you to all the sections, Mr. Speaker. What is more challenging to me, Mr. Speaker, is that this bill takes away the discretion of it hobbles the Director of Immigration. Because here, what's going to happen under this bill, I get my certificate from the minister or from the board, right, that I have a a commercial enterprise certificate. I then give you the list of names of persons that I going to bring in. Right. Well, you see, okay, let's look at 5.2. 5.2 says that the certificate will be extant for 1 year and renewable. Right? Well, let me ask you something. You look, then, I refer you to 8.4. See, that speaks about the same person who gets the certificate, whose certificate is going to expire in 1 year, being able to get someone in here with a work permit for 3 years. Not up to 3 years, but for 3 years. That is the inconsistency. See, that's your inconsistency. Yes, it's 1 year, but I bring in someone and he can get the work permit automatically if the director doesn't answer in 14 days. I get the certificate automatically for 3 years, not for up to 3 years. Well, if the certificate is could expire in 1 year, why you want them to have automatically 3 years? Why not the 1 year, for example? No, ain't no issue. I wasn't going to touch it. But he raised me, he told me I must look at that section. So I just wanted to point out how it is inconsistent with the other thinking of the bill. And so, Mr. Speaker, what I'm saying is that it's very difficult to appreciate that this bill was thought out. Another point, for example, it was alluded to, well, they're just not going to come in and just get the certificate. They have to come and talk about doing a business plan, or the application has to be accompanied by a business plan. That's laudable, a business plan. But the challenge with what the provision is saying in the Act is that the business plan must have an agreed, let me read it right, must have an agreed position on training and capacity building. Now, with whom would that agreement be made? It seemed that the Bahama deal, yes, the Bahama deal, you all are now lauding of the Bahama deal. If it is just like the Bahama deal, very good, bring it on. I welcome it. That ain't $250,000. Right? And so, Mr. Speaker, the other point, I wonder what is the true philosophy behind this bill? I mean, is it that the government has received so many other, they would have received inquiries about these various enterprises to be set up in the Bahamas, and they would have encountered some challenges to get them going, and therefore this is necessary? I don't know. Because one would have thought that I would have heard what is the true purpose of this bill. So this is turning, again, Mr. Speaker, first of all, this bill renders, they talk about training and building capacity. But there's nothing in this bill to talk about upward mobility of those who may be trained. It doesn't speak to that. It doesn't speak about what happens to the person after they have been trained. Right? So what happens to them, Mr. Speaker? And so, Mr. Speaker, so what has happened is that this bill has a sense of creating we have what, seven reverends over here? Right? It renders us to nothing more than drawers of water and hewers of wood. Right? Stone or wood. Stone, whatever it is. In some translations they say wood, some say stone. But whatever it is, it renders us only nothing but employees, and we continue. It's like setting up a plantocracy. So, Speaker, And just on the question, Mr. Speaker, why do you need those things? To ensure that we are clearing that persons who are about efficiency. And I think Ms. Komalapi summarized the view of this side in her statement when she said this morning, rather than focus on reforming the Department of Immigration to be more efficient and effective, the current administration has chosen to take a shortcut by concentrating significant powers in a super minister without checks and balances. You all be patient and watch. Be patient and watch, right? And so, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, there's much more I would say on this bill, but this is an indictment on this government to be able to be dismantling the hopes and aspirations of Bahamians. The challenge that Bahamians have in this country is access to capital. We should be liberalizing and assisting
Honourable Member.
Capital access rather than liberalizing work permits. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many? The chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Pine Ridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the people of Pine Ridge, I wish to extend my deepest sympathy to the family of the late Sir Arlington Butler for his national contributions. It will not go unnoticed in Bahamian history. Also to Mr. Ronnie Butler, a musical icon in the Bahamas. His music will forever be in the hearts of the Bahamian people. He will truly be missed. And to another great Bahamian in his own right, Mr. Carver Grant, from Freeport, Grand Bahama, on behalf of the people of Pine Ridge, my family, and especially my wife, Tracy, we wish to convey our deepest sympathy to his wife, Veronica Grant, his children, Dr. Elsa, Wendell, and Wendy Grant. We pray that the souls of all these departed will rest in peace and rise in glory. Mr. Speaker, as I seek to speak to this piece of legislation, I hope to do so from a layman's term and from the perspective of me having viewed the bill and interpreting the bill. I also hope to be conscious and conscientious about my presentation, hoping to seek to bring some balance to this piece of legislation and debate. Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank God for this favorable time to stand in this venue to address my collegial partners on matters of national and mutual interest. I would also be remiss if I did not acknowledge the good and gracious people of Pine Ridge, the community who have sent me here to do their bidding, for which I am indebted. Mr. Speaker, it is evident to me that the government of the Bahamas, through this piece of legislation, is seeking to jumpstart, revive, and/or expand the economy. The bill is moving in the right direction as it relates to streamlining the work process and creating an atmosphere for ease of doing business. Something extremely crucial for the financial stability and advancement of our citizenry. The Bahamas economy, while stable, hasn't advanced at the rate that we would wish it to be. Moving in an upward trajectory seems dormant at this period. The people of the Bahamas look to its elected government, past and present, to stimulate, cajole, and even diversify the economy for the benefit of the masses. Mr. Speaker, the irony of the last 6 words have almost been an albatross around the neck of successive governments, and we would be no exception. Those 6 words are, for the benefit of its masses. It's even handy to say for the last 15 or perhaps even 20 years or so, the masses have not felt economic rejuvenation in their pockets. There has been no pocketbook trickle-down effect to the average person in the country. If you were to speak with them one-on-one, they would all tell you, everything has gone up except their wages. Mr. Speaker, while I perceive there's no quick fix, people voted for us to get it fixed. That is the economy. That is why legislation is being proposed by our government. Mr. Speaker, I don't know if the country comprehends that the former administration left us in a precarious situation internationally as it relates to foreign investors. Many foreign investors, due to the past of the last regime, are timid, shy, if you please, to do business with us based on how we have done business in the past with a foreign investor. I can't figure out how the former government got into a private business affair with an investor who invested billions of dollars, who came from a billionaire family and thought to themselves that it would not affect doing international business in this country. Let's do the math. If they came from money, invested their money, and appeared that you, that is the former government, helped to bamboozle them, that is the investor, from their invested money, you didn't think global people with money would see that and not question our moral and business ethics? Mr. Speaker, our international reputation has been tarnished in this regards as it relates to foreign investment and investors. The former administration ate the sour grapes, but have put the country's teeth on edge. In other words, we're the recipients of a stagnated economy based on bad decision, panic, and political expediency from the former leadership. Amen. Mr. Speaker, what we're seeking to do here today is to establish legislation of establishing a specified commercial enterprise in the Bahamas. Any person desirous includes Bahamians. I would hope that the same courtesy would be extended to our nationals as afforded our foreign counterparts. Let me hasten to say, while this legislation is conducive and favorable to foreign investors, it's our expectation that the Bahamians will reap the benefit. The bill indicates that anybody seeking to do business must come to the table with $250,000 or $250,000. I can accept this for foreign investors, but this still might be a bit much for the local investor. And I say that because we still have not yet reached a point in this country. You can borrow money for a house and car, but banks are still timid as a result to lending persons money for the establishment of a business or enterprise. My view has always been that we would always, or we should always seek to be accommodating to our local investors who live here, hire here, work here, and often die here. Mr. Speaker, the bill also gives the minister power to amend the first schedule, which means to add other enterprises which may not be mentioned in this bill under this first schedule. Since we have created a board specifically to deal with such matters, perhaps the minister should share the responsibility to amend the schedule with the investment board. In this century, you have to move away from one man being invested with all power, or what we would call the almighty minister. Everything we do ought to be about the people, and we should seek people's involvement or at least opinions, which only speaks to true transparency and democracy. Mr. Speaker, I agree that this can be a positive move, especially when you're talking about specified zoning, which is needed even more so here in New Providence. Notwithstanding, Bahamians, especially family islanders, are particular when it comes to their land, especially generational property, which seems to be controversial, and or even crown land. I'm suggesting that we move with caution and due diligence as it relates to specified zoning for any commercial enterprise, particularly on our family islands, which will be welcomed by them. It really boils down for value. It really boils down to value for usage. I prefixed my remarks to lead into this point. The bill does not require any public input or consultation with the proposed board. People should have a right to know what industry or enterprise is coming in their area or proximity of their locality. That's the same issue we're having right now in Pine Ridge, in the Hawksbill community, and the Pennis Point Lewis Yard, where you have these industry companies and people feel that their health is affected by it, whether it's so or not so. If we're going to do such a thing, we should give the community the right to be involved in the decision-making process as to what's going in their neighborhood and community. If there's no consultation with the public and the board on such matter, it therefore leads one to believe that the zoning will be left up to the political directorates. And if such is the case, then that could also lead to the temptation of being or becoming corrupt. A more transparent process will ensure the long-term intent for this provision to be achieved. Mr. Speaker, the bill also states that the Minister of Finance, with consultation with the Minister of Financial Service, may prescribe such economic incentives as may be required to give effect to such specified commercial enterprise zones. The bill speaks of very little or no measure as to how these incentives are to be met, and no mechanism put into place for oversight. Mr. Speaker, it's important that the board sees to it that while we are accommodating to foreign investors and those bringing folks along, in many instances to oversee, build, work, and help in the establishment of their businesses, Bahamians must be afforded an opportunity to be trained, developed, and employed in various enterprise establishments. We should find a way in this process to see to it that specific trainings are facilitated for these companies in a time frame for which Bahamians should be able to elevate into some of these senior positions. These companies must go beyond just government collecting revenue, taxes, etc., for the consolidated funds. The Bahamians must feel some residual benefits from these enterprises. Mr. Speaker, the facilitation unit is placed there to help expedite the work permits, and whereas I understand that they need to move swiftly, we should also need them to be thorough. We want to know who's coming into our country. Their history is very prevalent as it relates to character, moral, and source of funding. Mr. Speaker, we must also ensure that those coming to do business in the country are above board in their dealings, especially when it comes to inviting Bahamians to participate perhaps in shareholding. Right now, many of our people in Grand Bahama are crying for the assistance from this government to deal with the Bahamian shareholders who feel that they're being taken advantage of as it relates to their shares in the Grand Bahama Power Company. They describe it as a hostile takeover. Some of them want their dividends in a timely fashion, and they wish to keep their shares in the company that they have invested in. They describe our government's silence. They describe our government's silence on this matter as deafening. Please see what we can do to ensure that our people receive equity, fair play, and financial justice in this matter. Mr. Speaker, seeking to bring this balance. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, if we are to be, Mr. Speaker, if we are to be blatantly honest and truthful with the Bahamian people, I think I need to say this again. Please sound Andrews. If we are to be blatantly honest and truthful with the Bahamian people, the model for this legislation already exists in the Bahamas, particularly Grand Bahama. No, I want to just let you know it exists. Now.
We need something in the loose for now.
Now, watch this. I'm going to ask my colleagues, as we move forward, I'm trying to create a balance. The Grand Bahama Shipyard is a case in point. The challenge we will have moving forward after the passage of this legislation is dealing with the psychological impact of our citizenry, as I know it to be even in Grand Bahama. There, that is, Bahamians, coming to grip with the fact that persons who don't look like them, speak like them, nor culturally identifiable work by the 10s, 20s, 50s, and 100s, while Bahamians still cannot meet mortgage, rent, put groceries in their houses, or meet the essential needs of their families. Mr. Speaker, I'm speaking from experiential knowledge in Grand Bahama. Banks are loaded, banks, yeah, means experience.
I'm confused, you man.
No. banks are loaded with foreign entities on payday, more so than Bahamian working class on the island of Grand Bahama. I want my collegial colleagues to recognize that I get what we are attempting to do, and I believe it is the right thing to do to enhance the economy and for direct foreign investment. Nonetheless, and that's why I'm going to keep speaking for my people. No, because they hear you. You think they don't hear you, but they hear you. And then when I stand up in here and I speak boldly and proclaim, then you all say, I'm on the other side.
You with us, man.
No. I'm speaking my conscience.
He was only
Nonetheless, to the average Bahamian, they will not be so embracing because it's not immediately.
Honorable member, you can
Pine Ridge
continue.
wants your attention, man.
I've been here before, so I know the rules. I'm not a stranger to Parliament. I beg your protection, Mr. Speaker. We can sing together, but we cannot all speak together. And if I'm going to be distracted, I would prefer to be distracted by the opposition, but not my colleagues. Nonetheless, the average Bahamian, they will not be so embracing because it's not immediately. And in some instances, it will never affect or increase their pocket. Let me see if I can break this down for my people listening and watching by giving an example. Let's propose that one of these companies in Grand Bahama were to make $55 million in profit. 35 goes out of the country. 20 million remains. The 20 that remains in the country will be spent on license fees, fees to the Grand Bahama Port Authority, Freeport Power, a rich law firm, governmental fees, etc., work permit, taxes. The transportation of the foreign workers will be done by a person who perhaps is already in the business and lucrative. Foreign workers will rent from those persons who no doubt already have a prestigious home. Foreign workers will shop at the established grocery stores. Example, i.e., Solomon's. The foreign worker will communicate using, well, that's the major store in Grand Bahama. Telecommunication network already exists. So here's the point I'm trying to make, to which some of us find funny because we do, but here's the point. So the 20 million that's being spent is being spent into the consolidated fund of the government, the rich, the already famous, and already established. The average man does not receive what is known as the trickle-down effect. You see, because even the fellow in the grocery store packing the shelf will tell you he don't know when last he received a raise, even though foreigners are now shopping, Mr. Speaker. However, then the shop owner will tell you the reason he hasn't received a raise is Bahamians are shopping far less. And foreign workers are now only allowing them to make up what they were used to making. Hence, the need for a raise does not comply. The foreign workers will not stop or shop at the mom and pop store. and the duplex and apartments being rented are not new because Bahamians are just trying to survive and are unable to invest in an apartment in this season. The other side of the coin that also bears magnifying is the fact that many rich or wealthy Bahamians have not done well as it relates to reinvesting entrepreneurially back into the country. They seem to invest their money in equity funds and stocks and bonds, and there's nothing wrong with that. But many wealthy Bahamians seem hesitant to invest in the Bahamian economy. Case in point, we are a touristic industry. Many will say it is our #1 industry. Yet we don't have one Bahamian or Bahamian group that owns a hotel. Other persons in the regions seek the value or understand the ownership than others. It's not just hotels. It's touristic business on the whole. We must find a way to enhance, coerce, and or caress the wealthy Bahamians by way of incentivization to do more locally and internationally. I may not have it all together, but the point out there is received and understood by the masses. Just for the record, what we're seeking to do with this piece of legislation have already been adapted throughout the region. Jamaica has already done so. I'm told hotels are popping out of the ground, although this has nothing to do with hotels except we talk about the health boutique. But the fact is, those hotels are going up because a lot of foreign entities are coming in, bringing their people to build these hotels and to manage it. And they tell me hotels are popping out of the ground left, right, and center. Tourism is booming, and the economy of Jamaica is on a major rebound, as was stated by the DPM earlier today as well. Jamaica is just one of many in the region, even throughout South America. In order to grow this economy, we need direct foreign investment and international entrepreneurial encouragement. Now, this is for the politicians of the past and present in this place. I'm switching gears here for national entrepreneurialism. Let me preface my statement by saying, you can't convince people to buy a product that you yourself show little confidence in. You tell me, that is, we politicians and our successive governments, that there's money to be had in agriculture. Millions of dollars we come in this place constantly saying. There's money to be had in agriculture. Millions of dollars. So you encourage the average man to go into farming, while we in this place encourage our children to become lawyers, doctors, and engineers. And you think people out there don't realize that? So you're sending our people, go farming, plenty of money in it. But we in here encourage our children to be doctors, lawyers, and engineers, and everything else. So let me break that down. Yes, we have teeth. Therefore, the average Bahamian says, if there's so much money in it, why aren't you successful Bahamians and parliamentarian business persons in and out of the place not involved? In this day and time, Bahamians believe in this game as a reality known as show and tell. Then the other side of this coin, some Bahamians go into farming only to have the government and the nation deny buying their product. I just telling you some of the things that got us to this place. And we have a responsibility to fix this, to do our part. That's why we're here. We must begin to speak the language of the people, and we must begin to do some things that people can feel in their pocket. There are persons on the family islands who depend on their children and grandchildren to send them a little money and a box on the mailboat. And a lackluster economy serves these family islands and us no good. Whatever we do, we must get this economy moving in the right direction for the benefits of Bahamian everywhere. This legislation is designed to do just that. Is it the best? No. But the journey, as the Chinese philosopher said, the journey of 1,000 begin with the first step. And we're making a step. We need to do something, because the reality is, whether we want to accept it or not, the last regime, consciously or unconsciously, has left a bad taste in the mouth of foreign investors to do business in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Pine Ridge supports the bill to enhance economic stimulus for the people in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas by way of this commercial enterprise regulation. I pray it works in favor of our government with total benefits for the Bahamian people. Much obliged, Mr. Speaker, and God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Manning.
Okay. Mr. Speaker,
The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Elizabeth.
thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to represent and to speak on behalf of the wonderful people of Elizabeth. Before I get into the substantive part of a contribution that I did not intend to make, I think it's very important that as we wear these orange ribbons, that we acknowledge and take into our heart the serious challenge faced by the women and children of this country who suffer from domestic violence at a rate that means we are one of the most violent people to our loved ones in the world. And so as we wear these ribbons, Mr. Speaker, let us be mindful and not just wear them, but let us live it and for what it stands. Mr. Speaker, I had no intention of speaking to this bill. Quite frankly, I thought it was going to be well received. But I think what we have seen today is an example of the utilization of the tactic of selective truth. To put it in a different way, Mr. Speaker, selective truth. Never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Never let the truth get in the way of a good story. You see, Mr. Speaker, the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas have suffered for a very, very long time. As we campaigned, as I campaigned in Elizabeth and as my colleagues campaigned throughout the Bahamas, we would not only have heard, but we would have seen the suffering, the cries of the people of this country. And what they said to me, and what I'm sure they said to my colleagues is, please, no more business as usual. Don't just talk. Make some real changes for this country.
Transformational.
Transform this country.
Transfigure.
Let us change this country for the betterment of the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. When I spoke about the choice for the first bill that we brought to this House, I would have said, and my colleagues would have joined me, to the member for Kalani, go long. And I use that football metaphor for a reason, because I think a lot of people can understand it, because sometimes these bills can be somewhat complicated. But the people on that side and the opposition heard us say, go long, and so they came up with a defensive tactic called the blitz. And I want to explain today, Mr. Speaker, what is the blitz? Because what we are watching today is a blitz. Now, how do you blitz the quarterback or leader of this country? So what happens is that the defense will send usually 5 or more defensive men at the quarterback in order to knock him down. Sack the quarterback. Now you notice they only got 4. And so, Mr. Speaker, I want you to understand that they're starting off from a point where they cannot succeed. The people on this side, represented by South Beach, by Mount Moriah, by Fox Hill, by Golden Gates, etc., we form the offensive line. And we are going to form a protective pocket for our quarterback. Now we got a couple of fellas going long, okay? And so when they blitz, the damage of blitzing the quarterback is that you leave somebody open. And so when Kalani throws his quarterback for the people of the Bahamas, it's going to be a touchdown. Mr. Speaker, what this is about is the economy of the Bahamas and how do we provide opportunities for the people of the Bahamas. This is about Bahamians. This is about the people that we love. This is about restoring hope. This is about restoring opportunity. This is about providing an opportunity for real careers. But you see, those that practice selective truth are not interested in hearing this story, Mr. Speaker. And so,
You gotta go in the dressing room.
when the member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador would have raised the question about the difference between them and us, boy, he opened up.
Let's listen.
He opened up.
Let's listen, guys.
He opened up something that I wasn't going to talk about today.
Okay.
Because you know, Mr. Speaker, there's a big difference between them and us.
Yes.
And so, Mr. Speaker, I got to go back a long way. But I'm not going to do it for a very, very long time. You see, the Bahamas economy has always been one of boom or bust. Boom or bust. We could go back hundreds of years. We can go back to when logging in the Bahamas was a huge industry in Abaco. The contract for logging was signed by William Robert Bell in 1900. And we had a whole lot of logs leaving Abaco and going to the world. Mr. Speaker, we had pineapples. We were the world's biggest producer of pineapples. We had sponges. We had dairy farming at Hatchet Bay and Golden Isles. Mr. Speaker, we had chicken production in the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, one of the best and productive airlines in the world, Bahamas Airways, aligned with BOAC, was in the Bahamas. Now, we did some other little clandestine stuff. We used to do some rum running and some shipwrecking, but it was all boom or bust. Right around after the Great Depression and World War II, the economy of the Bahamas was at a standstill, Mr. Speaker. And you may recall that a fellow who has been somewhat vilified by the name of Sir Stafford Sands introduced a model of tourism that unfortunately remains to this day. And so our economy has been stuck on two pillars for the most part: tourism and financial services. Bahamians have seen a stagnation of opportunity. They have watched the tourism product plateau. Our Minister of Tourism, the representative for Freetown, has said that stopover visitors have not grown in years.
From 1986.
And so the member of Kalani, supported by his offensive line, in the huddle said, what should we do? How do we score for the people of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas? And the word that we came up with was diversification. Diversification, Mr. Speaker. What we need to do, if you want to use a different metaphor, is we got to go find some new cheese. If you don't like cheese, call it conch. But you got to go from just plain tourism and financial services, and you have to find new opportunities for the people of the Bahamas. That's what this bill is about, Mr. Speaker. The question is, are we going to be stuck in a 1960s model, or are we going to make the Bahamas a modern participant in the world economy? I love my people. I love the people of Elizabeth. And when we were in that huddle, Mr. Speaker, we told the leader, we told the member for Kalani, go along, diversify. We will block these fellas as they blitz. But they blitzed, they did. And you notice that Cat Island, Rum Key, and San Salvador started even before the debate started. As a matter of fact, he was found to be offside, eh? You see, Mr. Speaker, what has happened is that we have watched the de-evolution of the people on the side opposite. They would have been the progressive liberal thinkers of the 1960s and possibly the first year or two in the 1970s. But when we realized that the logging industry in the Bahamas died in 1972, Mr. Speaker, and that Hatchet Bay closed in 1984, Mr. Speaker, and that, how can you kill an industry of chicken production in the Bahamas? Now, how is that possible? But it died in 1973. It was resuscitated, then it died again later on. But I put it to you, Mr. Speaker, that under the progressive thought of Bahamianization, which I support, which was badly executed by those on that side because they got lost, and it was no longer for the people of the Bahamas, it was kind of all for me, that the opportunities for Bahamians went to the wayside. And so we find ourselves here, Mr. Speaker, once again in a period of bust. And what the leader, the member for Kalani, is going to do is he's going to go along. We're going to block, and we're going to stop that blitz. And for the people of the Bahamas who are hearing all manner of nonsense about this is about foreigners, and this is about bringing people into your country, Mr. Speaker, it is nothing of the sort. What this bill seeks to do is to provide opportunities in industries that do not exist in this country for Bahamians and anybody else. That's why I call it selective truth, Mr. Speaker, because Cat Island, Rum Key, and San Salvador deliberately, I believe, well, let me not impugn his character, did not initially notice, and I think Carmichael had to point out that this act shall apply to any person who is desirous of establishing a specified commercial enterprise in the Bahamas. And so, Mr. Speaker, what we are seeking to do is to make the Bahamas the Singapore of the Caribbean. What we are seeking to do, Mr. Speaker, is to say to the young people of the Bahamas that your government will not be stuck in the patterns of the past. Your government is going to look for new opportunities for you. We are not only going to look for jobs for you, but we are going to look for careers for you. We are going to look for opportunities for you. And when we create zones in this country, it is not restricted to foreigners, Mr. Speaker. It is for everybody to participate. Now, Mr. Speaker, I am most surprised that the side opposite would take the tactic that they did, particularly given the fact that we are following a model that they had embraced. And so I have in front of me, Mr. Speaker, a document from the Labor Department, which is an agreement between the AIBT, the Association of International Banks and Trust Companies in the Bahamas. It is dated the 11th day of November 2015.
2015.
11th day of November 2015. And in it, it is an agreement for labor certificate waivers. Now, I'll read a little bit of it.
Between who?
The parties recognize that when an owner makes a significant investment in allocating resources to set up an operation in the Bahamas, it may require senior management that is familiar with the operational structure, culture, and business practices of the owner. With this in mind, the Department of Labor affirms the practice of waiving the requirement for advertising the position, as well as the issuance of a labor certificate for the following employee categories: CEO, Chief Executive Officer; COO, Chief Operating Officer; CIO, Chief Investment Officer; Managing Director; President, and Country Representative. It is signed by Aaliyah Allen, the CEO of the Bahamas Financial Services Board, Antoinette Russell, and Robert Farquharson, the Director of Labor. Now, Mr. Speaker,
Was this tabled?
I'm going to table it today.
No,
Mr.
was
Speaker.
it tabled then?
I can't speak to that, but what I can say is that the progressive thought in things to make it easier to do business in the Bahamas. So it was wise then. But all of a sudden now, because of the approach of what I call selective truth, remember, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Now I am sure that Cat Island, Exuma, South and Central Andros, my good friend, and Engliston will claim they don't know nothing about this. But, Mr. Speaker, I would say to the people of the Bahamas as I close that the people of the Bahamas are not interested in business as usual. They want to know whether we are creative. They want to know that we are working on their behalf. They want to know that we are going to go look for opportunities. And most importantly, that we're going to grow this economy. That this economy is going to flourish so that they can take care of their wives, their children, their mothers, their fathers. That they want to participate in this growing, wonderful Bahamian economy. That is why this offensive line will circle Kalani so that he can go long and that we will block this blitz. Mr. Speaker, Elizabeth supports this initiative.
As many, the chair recognizes the honourable member for South and Central Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Just a moment, Central Andrews. The honourable member for Elizabeth, are you tabling a document?
I am, Mr. Speaker.
Order that the document do lie on the table. The chair recognizes the honourable member for South and Central Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and also Mangrove Key with your concurrence, sir. Thank you.
Oh, yeah?
Mr. Speaker, on this afternoon, as we've had much discussion already, I'd like to preface my very brief comments by paying homage and respects to the memory and legacy of the late great Ronnie Butler, of him a musical icon, artist, social commentator, and also who spent more than half of a century being a part of the local scheme of things in the music industry in our beautiful country. Songs such as Bohemian Road, Calypso, Woke Up Early One Morning, many years as I hosted on national radio on the still most renowned radio show in the history of this country. The Good Morning Bahamas show, that name still lives on. There would never be another show that would have made that kind of impact in this country, because unlike other persons who talk and regurgitate history, I would have been to every nook and cranny of this Commonwealth broadcasting and touching the people of this country in an empirical and a tangible way. So I know them. So today, I want to say to Ronnie, who has gone on, like Lord Kitchener, Sparrow, Byron Lee, Red Flat Paper Bag of Barbados, and many others, job well done, my friend. Songs in collaboration with Sweet Emily, KB, Fred Ferguson, Iris Starr. But you can't help but think about those who have already gone on also to media rewards, such as Eloise Lewis, Tell Me Why I Run. In those days, Mr. Speaker, I smiled because as an island boy in the late 70s into the early 80s, growing up with my grandparents in Smithsville, you couldn't play certain songs on Mama and Papa radio. So just before the news came on, the radio, for the most part, turned on. So you wasn't going to hear a bunch of Calypso unless Papa was in the boat somewhere. It wasn't going to play too much devil music because we were good Church of God people on his radio. And that's the real fact. So when I listen to those songs, and remember and you ever sang those songs, they want to know where you got that song from. Because certain radios didn't play much in the Family Islands. Piccolo and Count Bernardino, Lord Cody came down for the independence celebration many years in South Andros. The Honorable Voice Butler, Freddie Morning Sr., the Obiang Man, Tony McKay, late great Wendell Stewart, Ezra, still alive and not doing so well, Joseph Spence, who we saw his legacy and proud of his heritage being showcased at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. Tony Seymour, Pretty Blue Eyes, T-Connection, still want to see them perform any given day, Bahamian, the list goes on, Maureen de Valier. So today, Ronnie, you've gone and you will be with your friend Count Bernardino, and I can imagine you and Count kind of getting together, if the good Lord allows. What a day that would be, just to see them two, if they can have a chance to do a little something. Maybe with a more kind of godly repertoire on the other side. Moving along quickly, Mr. Speaker, I must also note that to my good friend and confidant, Sadie Bastian, on the passing of her father, Mr. Boleg and Central Andros of Mangrove Key, also of Mangrove Key, who was 92 years old, to the family extend our condolences. To my former colleague at the Broadcasting Corporation of the Bahamas, Ricky Thompson, how can I forget him? As a young man, after completing my studies at the then College of the Bahamas in the electronics program at the associate degree level, going to the broadcasting of the Corporation of the Bahamas, wanted to be an engineer. And they said, I guess, I was too skinny, what have you, whatever, and I became a production assistant first. And I got to see Colin Trotman, who was still at the corporation. I went on, and Ricky Thompson was there. We went through the training and setting up remote broadcast. And there was Ricky, who always wanted to work overtime and midnight till dawn show. We all hated that show. But Ricky gave so much. He was a songman, a cameraman, anything. He was a Mr. Everything at the Broadcasting Corporation of the Bahamas. So I would be joining the ZNS family, if all goes well, this Saturday morning at St. Margaret's in Kemp Road. Also, Mr. Speaker, finally, this gentleman who we all would have grown to love in our society, we call him Sir Ali, an educator, a disciplinarian, parliamentarian, a diplomat. He would have been a benefactor to many athletic associations of our beautiful country. He was urbane and tailored in his oral presentation. He could really be called the Earl of Windsor, because no one spoke like Sir Ali. So joy to hear Sir Ali said, "I swell," when he does that, and his voice and everything else, and he rests his hand on top of his stomach and he spoke to you. And he became one of the beloved persons in that community of South Andros. He became godfather to two of my hometown girls, Cynthia Adley, the late Donald Adley's daughter, and Clara Roll Thompson, Uncle David Roll in Smithsville, his daughter. And he was one who was loved by the Family Island folks. And we're going to miss him for his insight, sense of humor and wit, but sound mind and good judgment and good advice. So Sally, Ronnie, and all those who've gone on, may their souls rest in peace. But one day, Mr. Speaker, we all anticipate that they would rise in glory. Mr. Speaker, by the way of housekeeping, as a member of some standing in this place, I think there's some things that we should note. And the member for Carmichael, who's been here a little longer than I would have, from the governing side, should warn some of the newer members that when you are seated, Mr. Speaker, and they see you speaking, even if you would just be doing a presentation, sometimes the former speaker had what I call soliloquies. But the fact that you don't go into that all that too much, but I'm saying that members should know that they should just take a seat when you are speaking. When you are speaking, members should not be walking to the bar to exit this honorable place. Also, our dress code, we've got to be minded. I'm a little bright today, but Mr. Speaker, we understand that. I am a senior member with good standing in this place, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you got to fight hard to see the red in that. But Mr. Speaker, also when it comes to packages being passed over the bar, no one should be passing anything to any member over the bar. It should be called one of the clerks who will be willing to assist anyone who brings anything to members on the honorable place. There are certain things that must remain in this place, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member, I'll bang on the desk for that one.
Thank you. It was interesting and pretty instructive to hear Member for Elizabeth just now mentioning the line and him protecting the good member for Kalani. I'm wondering if that line would not be like the Dallas Cowboys line that led to the virtual demise of Tony Romo. Tony Romo would have been blindsided. got his jawbone broke. Got his collarbone broken. And all the while the fellas keep on telling Tony, we got your back. But in the meantime, they were looking at a young man as tall as I am, almost as good looking as I am, Dak Prescott, who was waiting in the ring and saying, "Oh, I want that ball. I only want one chance to get that ball." Mr. Speaker, may I admonish the member for Kalani through you, sir. Please continue to keep your eye on that line. Please, where you are, please watch your right tackles. And look here, since things are already tight, I'm not bothered with the member for East Grand Bahama. That's my real friend. I ain't bothered with that. So it ain't him. I'll leave it like that. Mr. Speaker, in my own way, the member for Exuma, Ragged Island, and Exuma Keys, is a businessman. Eloquent. The leader of my great party is a jurist and all that great thing. He's been around. He's a businessman and everything. I'm just a hometown boy. So I'm going to do this in my own way. I see this bill today as a, well, I mean, she's a, pardon me. She's the conscience of the party. No matter what you say, this is my friend. We go way back. This bill, Mr. Speaker, I had a line here. As a matter of fact, I had a note to say something different when I started. But during the lunch break, the member for St. Anne's caught me off guard. He told all of us about a story involving his father and the nomination process. And he came over here. Boy, God is a good God. And he gave me some skins, and he said, after he finished the story, he said, hometown boy. Not only you was a hometown boy, my daddy is also a hometown boy. He scratched a little line and said, you know, I was gonna call this bill Brent's bill at first. I'm going to throw a little comment in there. And I say, I would change that. I'll be more respectful to the member for St. Anne's. See, and I have our jocular moments. I said, Mr. Speaker, I say that this bill, in my view, could be termed the last mile or challenging way to the future for young professionals, businessmen and women in our country. Imagine, Mr. Speaker, in the 21st century Bahamas, Bahamian businessmen and women almost being seen virtually once again as front man for non-Bahamians who want to invest a mere $250,000 in our country, setting up shops here in Nassau, Grand Bahama, or any of our family islands. Mr. Speaker, as for me, as my people in Andros are watching and listening this afternoon, I am challenged a bit by this bill in that it allows with the zones that have not been specified or spoken to directly to be set up virtually anywhere in our Commonwealth. So I speak in defense of Andros with its lush flora and fauna, bites and wetlands and forestry, beckoning many persons and prospective entrepreneurs to come. And we know that there have been some that have come in the name of various organizations to invest in Andros. But we are very minded of what they want in return for investing. This makes it easier, Mr. Speaker, for an investor who has the $250,000, $250,000, to come from Guyana, St. Lucia, Jamaica, the Dominican Republic, Europe, anywhere, set up shop in the Bahamas, whereas Bahamian developers and entrepreneurs today, Mr. Speaker, are praying for assistance from their government. And lo and behold, this bill comes directly in their face. I'm wondering, what about the Bahamas Investment Board and the National Economic Council and other such bodies? What roles have they been playing? I wish we could have heard more from what they've been doing. Because, Mr. Speaker, when I look at this bill, I look quickly as time is moving, I look at what I call the first schedule. And some of the areas under item 9, compliance with licensing and regulatory requirements. I look at areas such as captive insurance, computer programming, software design and writing, maritime trade, biomedical industries, data storage and warehousing, the list goes on. Medical fraternities. I wonder how people in the medical profession feels about this. The insurance industry. But, Mr. Speaker, what I would take note of directly is the maritime trade. The fly fishing industry, Mr. Speaker, is under attack in our country. Mr. Prescott Smith and others have been leading this charge, virtually at their behest. and their belief in Bahamians in developing and empowering this country for us, and especially the communities of Andros, by extension, that have seen their share of challenges over the years, and not direct attention paid to them. To have this, and to now have this bill come, where someone can come and bring $250,000 that most Bahamian businessmen could virtually find with some challenge sometimes. And they can now come into our territories and bring a boat with dinghies behind them and go onto our flats in Andros. Who can now stop them? If they were to be working with another Bahamian in the name of coming to do business in the Bahamas for $250,000. They'll be all over bites and creeks on the western side. And this is now the prime time of the bone fishing industry season, when our fellows make a couple dollars to take care of their families. Mr. Speaker, I'm concerned because when I see maritime especially, knowing that what has happened in more recent weeks, and now we're hearing of the repeal or suspension of the regulatory regime involving the fly fishing industry, Mr. Speaker, I am very concerned. I also note the fact that the issue of, number two, in our society, Mr. Speaker, various professions, I think, should have been given some leeway and been communicated with directly as we look at this commercial enterprises bill this afternoon. Because I think to some degree, they're going to be impacted. You look at it, it says, number two, in-house professionals. And I note what the bill says. Means an employee rendering professional or advisory services to a specified commercial enterprise within the strict confines of the undertakings of that enterprise and not in competition with professionals and advisors in the open market of the Bahamas. Well, the person comes here and brings his money. Can he then come and bring his own doctor, his own lawyer, his own accountant, his own IT professional? Yeah. And the thing it is with this, how many person can he bring? This is another concern, Mr. Speaker. Let me tell you why. Because we in the Bahamas, no matter what, there are some things that we have to preserve for Bahamians. There's some things, and so my thing is that we're not xenophobic. I know we're not. We want persons to invest. But I also concur with the member for examples. When you look at the figure that is involved here, $250,000. So, Mr. Speaker, and I heard earlier a member said, I think the member for East Grand Bahama, I think it was, I don't know if it was him, who said that they're going to come and live among us. Well, that kind of set off a little bell in my head. I wonder if someone that ain't got some plan for when these people come, who might have been identified, to simply come and rent some already prepared buildings or get some apartments that they already have prepared for them to rent. These are some questions that people, inquiring minds, I'm not saying you, member for East Grand Bahama, I'm just saying that we have to look at all the possibilities from this bill. Mr. Speaker, I'm not saying that the member for Pine Ridge said the same thing. Not that people not could come, we don't want people not to come in, not to rent buildings. But at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, a lot of our local businesswomen and women are catching eternal hell as it is today. They need a hand up too. And they need some assistance in this society. So my thing is that you cannot at the end of the day decide you're going to go after the niche markets, improve those and help those who are coming in and give them some equal access for this playing ground called the Bahamas, which I think is pretty sophisticated. It has a share of challenges, has good telecommunications, basic infrastructure in pretty good shape, especially in New Providence and Grand Bahama, and virtually decide, well, if the Cayman Islands is doing this, these are all colonies. Bermuda's doing it, well, we got to now lay everything, Mr. Speaker, there's some things that we must protect for ourselves in this Commonwealth. I feel very strongly about it. And Mr. Speaker, let me tell you why I'm also saying that. Because when one look at what has been happening recently, and I'm glad the member for Kalani is here, this, as we mentioned earlier, the whole issue of the immigration part of this bill that creates all the concern with a member, someone who applies for a business license, and not hearing from the Department of Immigration within 14 days, they automatically gets the immigration permit for the person who's applied in the application process in this effort to make the Bahamas attractive and for persons to come in and invest. I listened to all that. But the reality is this person who applies to the Bahamas then gets a permit for 3 years. I know that we've heard about the 1 year leave that they can have and things can happen. I listened to all that. But it's for 3 years. Mr. Speaker, that concerns me because just recently we had the backdooring by this administration in the referendum bill, when the Bahamian people in no uncertain terms told the PLP administration no to all 4 of the bills in the referendum, all 4. And now we are hearing, because they're not entrenched, that the government can do as it. And I hear one of the learned jurists making that same comment. Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, what is good for the goose got to be good for the gander. The Bahamian people said no. And I believe at the end of the day, we should do what is noble and what is fair. And I think our people should not be taken for granted. They said no to these bills. And at the end of the day, our people are taking note. Do not take the Bahamian electorate or the Bahamian people by extension for granted. Mr. Speaker, I'm very concerned as to how this whole process is moving forward. Mr. Speaker, quickly, when we look at the issue of zoning, I note one particular area here under number 4, specified commercial enterprises. The minister may prescribe by regulations that any island or any part of any island is a specified commercial enterprise zone for the purposes of rationalizing infrastructure investment, efficient land use, or the encouragement of clusters of commercial development. Now, Mr. Speaker, like I said, for us in Andros, we are concerned. We are asking for basic infrastructure improvement now. We're asking this government to have the road work completed in Central Andros, to have the waterways completed in South Andros, to have the repairs done in Mangrove Key. I believe in the member for Carmichael. And so my thing is, at the end of the day, though, how could I'm wondering about the investor. I'm wondering about the investor, Mr. Speaker, who comes in to spend $250,000, and maybe he can get a road cut to the west side of Andros very quickly. And so, Mr. Speaker, these are the little things that we have to look at. Now, our people still have not gotten clear title for land ownership in a lot of the areas in the districts of Andros, so that they really could be empowered. So, Mr. Speaker, for me, this is something, let's see now, the member for Bambutang is saying roads are being cut to the west side now. That's something our people got to be watching out for. Mr. Speaker, with this zone, people, I said to my people, and I told them in the town meeting the same thing. You've got to watch out for people who are coming in the name of association and organizations, because we have seen this whole scheme before. They come with this guys, Audubon Society, they're watching bikes and creeks and doing testing. They put up one shed, then the next thing you know it's extended. Then you know the crew is coming in bigger. Then you hear plane landing on the west side of Andros. You're hearing these stories now. Mr. Speaker, our people have got to be very vigilant. And we've got to be careful with this. Because I'm very concerned here, because if you could have infrastructure improvement, these zones and purpose for having these investments done, when the people who are living along the coastal regions cannot have it done for them as they live today, then some prospective investor could come and get a road done for him to the west coast or somewhere else. That's a major concern. That will cause major upheavals in my community of Andros, in particular, Mr. Speaker. Not that we would want anyone. I would disabuse my people of the view of trying to stop investments. But I say, Mr. Speaker, there must be some level of equity, and there must be, like someone said, a symbiotic relationship. Let the hand go, hand come. But it can't be where the people who've struggled all these years in that community are discriminated against when it comes to the economic pie in the community of Andros. I'm making that case for them here today. Mr. Speaker, I would want to say to those people in our business sector that to you who have gone all out, and I hear the gentleman calling a talk show who said that he has gone and gotten a brick and mortar business. They told him he needed a building. He gone and pay rent, hard to get money from the commercial or clearing banks in our country. He did all of that, and now he heard about this. He hears about this. I'm saying to that young Bahamian businessman over the hill, do not lose heart. I want to say to you, my brother, help and hope on the way. Mr. Speaker, I would want to say to the member for Centerville, who represents my mom and by extension myself, this includes McCulloch Corner, the heart of the world-renowned Saxon superstars, as we're getting ready for revelry once again in our country, that I, too, I think I'm going to maybe scrape a little sawdust here. I really appreciate his contribution today. I think it was very balanced. He brought a good sense of sobriety and equanimity to the discussion today. And I must say that I commend him when he noted the fact that the financial services sector has paid dividends for young Bahamians and professionals in our society, but some things have drifted off course. And I believe that. We've been hearing some quiet layoffs. There have been some challenges in the financial services sector generally. Member for Exuma spoke to it more specifically. And we hear these stories daily. But I would like to challenge this honorable place. When bills like this are coming up, I had a chance, Mr. Speaker, to visit the UK Parliament, where they have a business committee that was started in 2010 that sits in the hall west of their parliament. It's called Westminster Hall West. When business bills like this are coming up, they have a committee where backbenchers in particular would sit and go over those bills, and not using a private member's bill. Be allowed to present their findings or how they feel about the bill to the honorable halls of parliament. I think this way this parliament should also look at going in a progressive kind of way. And I think what the member for Centerville did today was pretty eye-opening. That's why that jogged my memory. And I want to commend him for it. And I think it's a very good step, because we live in a society. And someone visited this parliament the other day, a young lady visited and said, well, Mr. Forbes, why only members on your left-hand side or the speaker's right-hand side always seem to be getting up about everything, and what happened to all of the other people on the other side? These are questions people ask, persons ask. And I said, well, I kind of let her understand what's the basic process in here in the parliament, blah, blah, blah. But the fact of the matter is, it goes back to that point that I made earlier about how progressive parliaments, what they're doing and where they're headed. Someone like him, who would have been in the financial services sector, the member for Centerville, would have been a good person who could have gone through some kind of process and meetings with persons in this community where we would have feel good in the deep recesses of our heart this afternoon, Mr. Speaker, and maybe support this bill in the main. Because we could have felt that some discussions would have been had with those in the financial and the accounting, the world of accounts, and the legal fraternity, and maybe the medical, civil, engineers would have had some discussion, and architects, the list goes on. But there's a fear that these people were not included in the discussions. And Mr. Speaker, they are concerned because you're hearing this stuff, what you call, second-handedly. We have got to find a way to change. And you have great numbers in here in the governing side. Utilize some of these people in here. These are smart people. Utilize some of them. Let me admonish them as a senior member. They could utilize some of them. Let them feel a part of this process called the political process. I've been around a little while. I don't need no affirmation. But at the end of the day, let's keep them being a part of the process. You know, I want them to remain solid as a rock. I don't want them to keep no fire burning. I want them to be solid as a rock so they can make good contributions in this place. But Mr. Speaker, on a serious note, that's what we need to do in this parliament. We must move in a new direction. Mr. Speaker, I want to say, I feel as if we are giving up some things that I consider to be sacred. These economic zones, are these economic zones going to be inclusive of where? Downtown? Well, who's going to benefit from these economic zones. Who's going to decide these economic zones? Are we going to see these economic zones when are we going to see them? When the work already started, when they've been granted? Mr. Speaker, someone said to me, you need to know half of the eastern portion of Bay Street ain't got nobody in them right now. Look at that. I said, wow. And this is a supporter of the governing side. So I'm just telling you, no, I've been sitting there for a little while. You know, I tell them, but I live east, I see it every day. I'm just telling you what your supporters have said to me today. I'm saying, Mr. Speaker, this government espouses transparency and openness and accountability. You've got to keep everything above board. Bahamians have got to feel a part of the process of governance. I cannot see how we can sit down here unequivocally and say we can feel comfortable and allowing others to simply come in this country with $250,000 in their hand, start a business, when Bahamian business over the hill and downtown and in Centerville are struggling today before the holiday season. We have got to find a way to make a difference for our own people, and it must begin at home. Mama always said, charity begins at home and ends abroad. Mr. Speaker, against that backdrop, I take my seat, and I too am saddened, like the member for Exuma and Ragaland, that I cannot support this bill in its present state. But we look forward to further adjustments and amendments being made so that one day we can do just that as we make the Bahamas a better place for all of us to live. I'm much obliged, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. As many?
Take it back. Take it back.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Tall Pines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me say, like my good friend from Elizabeth, it wasn't my intention, Mr. Speaker, to speak on this bill, but having, and let me say too to the member for Cat Island, just as his member for Andres, South Andres noted, there is a strong voice, Mr. Speaker, on this side. But as the good member for Elizabeth said, and I want them to remember this, there's more than just the front line that has our quarterback in Kalani covered. He has a back bench, a back line, whatever you want to call it. He has a deep bench. And sorry, Cat Island, Tall Pines is one of those persons who's going to contribute whether you like it or not. You know why? You know why, Cat Island? You know why, Cat Island? Because Cat Island, the people in Tall Pines understand that this government, Speaker, that this government I don't know if the member for Cat Island have to remember. I think he was one of the members that only recently came to the front. He was, I don't even know, he's a safety for many years. But I pray that my time would not be as long, Speaker. The Speaker, but this bill is a very important bill. So I want to thank the people of Tall Pines for allowing me this opportunity to represent them, allowing me this opportunity to speak on their behalf once again, to be their voice in this honorable House. And I too, Mr. Speaker, would like to, on behalf of the people of Tall Pines, extend condolences to Arlington Butler, to Ronnie Butler, the late Calvin Johnson, our colleague. We also I want to, on behalf of Tall Pines, extend our respect to all of our fallen soldiers and our existing soldiers still around in this Bahamas as we celebrated Remembrance Day last week, Mr. Speaker. My late stepfather, Percy Strawn, he was a comrade, served in World War II. He's a good PLP too, Mr. Speaker. It's good PLP, but he served his country. I want to also say that the people of Tall Pines, we respect those honorable men that I mentioned, and we want to say to their families that we pray for them continuously. Speaker, we also want to join this Parliament in recognizing National Women's Week. I must say that there's always important to recognize the importance of women in our country. Notwithstanding the fact, Mr. Speaker, that in this honorable House today, we don't have as many women as I think we should have representing our constituencies in this country. But nonetheless, we respect them, we encourage them, and we encourage all Bahamian women to play their part, whether in this House or anywhere else, in business, in church, in schools, in education, wherever. So we salute our women, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I want to say, I wanted to speak on this bill because I think, like the member for Yamakura said, that this is a revolutionary bill. It's a timely bill. It's a bill that's crucially needed and very important for this time in our Bahamian history in terms of economics. Mr. Speaker, this bill takes us from, I would say, the period of analog to now the micro or digital age in our financial services industry and other industries. Speaker, I'm always tempted, and I do it intentionally to remind the Bahamian people of our commitment as the FNM, what we told them maybe on the streets a few months ago. And we promised, Mr. Speaker, in our manifesto, we promised to establish a national apprenticeship scheme. And so we wonder if some of the clause and intentions of this bill would be able to assist us in that regard. When we're talking about bringing new skills and industries to this economy, are we going to be reminded that we should marry these two? Our intentions, our promises. Again, the member for Exuma talked about scholarships and so forth. I always remind people that when new businesses come into these jurisdictions, particularly new industries, we know that there's always an element of education, and I implore us to encourage those persons to engage in providing scholarships to our Bahamians. But this bill encourages Bahamians to be a part of those industries, and they have to be trained in this industry, Exuma. So I'm sure that there's going to be some element of learning and scholarship and the ability to be able to go overseas and see how operations are did in various countries where the scheduled companies or the scheduled businesses are quite prevalent. Mr. Speaker, the FNM also promised in his manifesto that we will create jobs and reduce poverty and our economies, to take our economy away from its heavy dependence on tourism and banking. We said that we will restore financial services growth in this country. And I'm here to say, on behalf of the people of Tall Pines, that this particular bill, Mr. Speaker, this particular bill speaks to captive insurance, reassurance, mutual fund administration. I don't know where the member for South Andres was going in terms of fishing. I don't know what that have to do with maritime. He talked about caucusing. I wonder if he and his colleague actually caucus and look at what this bill actually is addressing. I don't think, Mr. Speaker, that is intended that the board that's mentioned in this bill would even comprehend a foreign investor coming to the Bahamas and talking about getting into, what's the fishing? Fly fishing. Come on, Mr. Speaker. Fly fishing. You wasn't listening to your member for South Andres? They're not going to come into this country. I don't foresee, Mr. Speaker, that investors coming under the guise of this particular bill, which has to go to a board, Mr. Speaker, for approval, coming in and that particular board passing or passing that on to get a certificate. So I think it's far-reaching. And when we talk about the maritime industry, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I don't think we're talking about whether or not we're going to allow persons to go down south fishing. I think that was kind of far-reaching. I think that was far outside of what this bill addresses. When we talk about international trade, Mr. Speaker, when we talk about maritime trade, Mr. Speaker, when we talk about these type of investments in maritime, I don't think, Mr. Speaker, that what the member for the South Andres was talking about is in place, Mr. Speaker. What's the point, Mr. Speaker? South Andres made the statement, Mr. Speaker. South Andres made the statement. I don't know what the member for Cat Island, Rumkey, and San Salvador. Well, he isn't here, Mr. Speaker. He talked about fly fishing, Mr. Speaker.
Are you yield? Are you yield? I'm asking you.
I'm not going to yield. What's his point, Mr. Speaker? When Cat Island, when South Andres comes in, let him explain himself. Let him explain what he meant by fly fishing and what relevance that has to this particular bill. He is, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you cannot come in this honorable house. Mr. Speaker, you cannot come in this honorable house and look at the bill and say, let me see what I could find in this bill to try and make it relevant to the man on the street. Oh, wow, maritime trade. Man, the people in South Andres, the fishing industry. Get real, Mr. Speaker. This bill is not intended to address or harbor any ill will against Bahamians in the maritime industry, such as fly fishing. We're talking about, Mr. Speaker, the maritime trade. I was on it, Mr. Speaker, just a few months ago to travel to London with the member for Southern Shores. They got it wrong, thinking that the government sent me to London, Mr. Speaker. As a lawyer, Mr. Speaker, I was privileged to did some courses in maritime law and some courses in maritime. And I wanted to join the member for Southern Shores and the member responsible for transport to be there, the IMO, while he visited our office, our maritime office. And I saw the technicalities that's involved. I saw the special skills that's involved. I was amazed when I went into that headquarters and saw the skilled persons that was necessary to make that international organization work, of which the Bahamas is a leading member. Speaker, how do we expand that industry in the Bahamas? How do we expand that industry in the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, if we don't invite persons of expertise from the west, east, south, north, I don't care where they come from, Mr. Speaker, after being properly vetted, as is mentioned in this bill, to be a part of this economy, to teach us, to work with us, to create opportunities for the people in Tall Pines and even the people in Cat Island and South Andres? How do we do that, Mr. Speaker? How do we do that if we don't come out of, Mr. Speaker, what I call, Mr. Speaker, the dark ages? I call it the dark ages, Mr. Speaker, of being afraid to do what is necessary to move our economy forward. Speaker, I'm all the way with the member for St. Anne's as we take this bold step. Mr. Speaker. And I don't know where the member for Exuma, he's my very good friend. Very good friend. I don't know where he was going when he's talking about this $10 million. I wonder, where was he when millions of dollars was being spent on Carnival, which I enjoy? Where was he? Where was he, Mr. Speaker? Was he around the table when they spent the millions of dollars right before the last election, because he was a candidate, and say, hold on, man, hold on. Let's invest this money in venture funds for the Bahamian people. Where was he? Now he has the audacity, Mr. Speaker, to talk about this money could be spent in other areas and so forth, right? Where was Exuma, Mr. Speaker, when the member for Marco City just last week, I think, talked about the initiatives that's happening in Grand Bahama in terms of giving funds to young people to invest? Where was Exuma? Again, Mr. Speaker, I say, Mr. Speaker, the members opposite look at a bill that they know they have nothing to really criticize, and they dig and they dig and they dig with no substance. Mr. Speaker, I call this bill a positive bill. I call this bill a bill that will propel the Bahamas not only in the financial industry, Mr. Speaker, but captive insurance, reassurance, mutual fund administration, wealth management, international trade. We talked about real maritime, not South Andres maritime, real maritime. We talk about biomedical industry, right? I wonder where he was going to go if he started talking about bio. Wait, good thing he didn't get that far down the list. Speaker, I talked about maritime because I love maritime, and I think this bill is going to help cause the Bahamas to be truly a maritime capital in the world, and a lot is going to be benefited by the Bahamian people as a result of this. I also must speak, Mr. Speaker, because something passionate in this also is we talk about arbitration. We've been talking a lot of times for many years about making Grand Bahama arbitration center in the Bahamas. I happen to be a certified mediator. I studied arbitration also to the extent. And we, in the legal profession, we've been talking about it for many years. And I think with this particular bill and the checks and balances that we have in place, we're going to see that industry also grow. We see London being the arbitration center, really, the leading arbitration center. We see them looking at Singapore and other jurisdictions and really watching. And they say that they're strategically located for that type of business because they're big in maritime, they're big in financial services and so forth. They're looking at Hong Kong, they're looking at Singapore. We're strategically positioned to benefit from this particular bill with regards to arbitration. Obviously, Mr. Speaker, there was some concern. I think it was by Exuma. How is this going to affect? How's it going to affect the industry? I think South Africans might have said it too. But the last section of this bill that talks about compliance with licensing and regulatory requirements, it makes it very, very clear that if you're going to come, Mr. Speaker, in the Bahamas and you're going to go into an insurance, captive insurance, then you're going to have to you still have to abide by the rules and regulations of whatever legislation or body that regulates and controls that industry. Obviously, arbitration may fall within the Bar Professional Act. Then you're going to have to fall within certain parameters of that. And the list goes on. So we're not saying, Mr. Speaker, that you're going to just come here because you're creating a business in captive insurance and you're going to just have your own way. The bill does not encourage it. The bill makes it very clear that when you come here, you abide by our rules. We're putting in place some mechanisms to make it easier to do business in the Bahamas. That's been hindering our country's financial industry development for so many years. No, we talk about Bermuda. We talk about Barbados even. We talk about the Cayman Islands. And we see them leaving us. They're beating us over and over and over again. And it isn't because, Mr. Speaker, it isn't because they're smarter than us, you know. It isn't because, it cannot be because of the jurisdictional issue, because we're primed from a geographical perspective. Well, Speaker, it is simply because of the fear that we see some of the members of the other side speaking about. Being afraid to make the necessary changes, even, Mr. Speaker, even with regards to immigration. Because in the Bahamas, we know that anytime for some reason, Mr. Speaker, anytime we see anything with immigration in it, we tend to, we fold up, we start to get, everybody said they're not xenophobic, all that stuff. We say it, but then we show actions of it. We tend to be afraid of competition instead of embracing it and learning and trying to propel ourselves forward. Anytime there's anything to do with immigration, we sell in the country to foreigners, right? But when they're in government, they can do whatever they feel like doing to advance, and they can put immigration in bold colors. But we ain't doing nothing to hurt the Bahamian people. This particular bill, Mr. Speaker, makes it very clear. Makes it very clear, Mr. Speaker. This bill makes it very clear when we talk about what procedures needs to be done. Mr. Speaker, it talks about the proper process that you have to present a plan and the KYC importance and so forth before work permit is even granted. It talks about the fact that you have to show in that plan how you intend to train Bahamians and to make sure that in 3 years or so, or whatever time, or a year, up to 3 years, or if it extends, a program in place to make sure that if you brought someone from Singapore, they're not going to be here for 3 or 6 years. Sanans, isn't that the plan? I don't know what Exuma, I don't know what Saddam is talking about. Mr. Speaker, look at Section 5, look at Section 5 too. Look at that. Training and capacity to build opportunities. Yes. It said that when you give the plan, look at it. Take a chance and look at it. Do not speak like how South Africa spoke. Take a look at the bill. Mr. Speaker, it talks about securing the certificate and making sure that this new board, the Commercial Enterprise Facilitation Unit, is established. Exuma calls it bureaucracy. Speaker, I mean, me and Exuma graduated from Ellen Coakley. We're proud of that. He calls it bureaucracy, right? I say that because we come from the same school. And I know they're watching me. And they heard you. Mr. Speaker, if you are going to create a position that's never existed before, that has certain ramifications with regards to immigration, with regards to bills, other professional regulations and so forth, as it relates to bringing in foreigners, period. And this is something new. And your investment board never really had to address this issue before. Don't you think it's prudent? Don't you think it makes sense, Sanans, to say, let's have a little unit within, let's be real about it, Mr. Speaker. And then it goes on, Mr. Speaker, to talk about how the work permit is done. I know, Mr. Speaker, this particular section really, and I'm going to be fair, I'm going to be honest, it really caused me to revisit the bill and look at it. Really, because as I said, you really want to be sure about certain things. And as the member said, all of us here have a little bit of smarts, right? Speaker, now, I am satisfied, having looked at it, examined it, actually caucused with my colleagues. I'm satisfied that it addresses the issue in a very decent way. Speaker, I'm satisfied that I could go back into our pines and say to that young lady who really wants to go off to university and study bio, engineering, whatever, and to be able to say to that young lady in Tall Pines that, you know what, there might be a job here in the Bahamas for you to come back to. Other person who goes and studies maritime law or arbitration and actually say, there's going to actually be a job in the Bahamas for you to come back to. I can actually go on the streets in Tall Pines and say that. And I can say to them, you know what, we have in place regulations to make sure that while you may see some foreign experts in this country, you don't have to worry about them staying here forever, because we have made provisions to make sure that you be able to get that high senior job in the very near future. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm just going to say that this particular government has put in place this bill to attract niche business to this Commonwealth, that I'm proud to support it. I see that, Mr. Speaker, that we have already put in place the groundwork for moving this country forward. I hear with great pride the member for Marathon a few days ago speaking about how we are sending out the bids now for the landfill in the New Providence and how we're advancing that process. And I heard a thing about the zones, Mr. Speaker, and I think it's important. And I just want to say that when we look at these companies coming, and I agree, because we have that issue with zoning and Tall Pines, so the dump being right there, that when these companies come in, you have to have them not only look at what their benefits are from a financial perspective, how their setup is in terms of locale, look at whether or not, we have to be careful that, especially if their community is next to these possible industrial enterprises, that they be cognizant of the effects of their businesses on neighbors. So I want to say to the member responsible for the environment that we are happy in Tall Pines that we're finally making a step forward, and we look forward to that. I think the Bahamas is looking forward to that. New Providence is looking forward to that. We are also laying the foundation, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member from Mount Moriah who came into our constituency and spoke at our town meeting last week about the new National Neighborhood Crime Watch initiative. It was very informative, and I'm going to invite persons to go to our Facebook if they miss it. Tall Pines Pride 2004 talked about how we could build our communities and how we could work together in terms of fighting crime. I'm going to speak at Christ Community Church this Monday because they are talking about the same thing, so I'm going to be able to steal some of the ideas that they spoke about in Tall Pines and speak to the people of Tall Pines with where we're moving our constituency forward. And so when we, and I say that because I'm just showing you, Mr. Speaker, that we are laying the strong foundation to move this country forward. And I want to say, St. Anne's, that Tall Pines have your back in this. I want to say, Kalani, you're covered, left, right, center, everywhere. We support you. You don't have to worry about anything in Tall Pines. We got your back. We support this initiative because we want every child in Tall Pines to have a great future. We support this bill because we want every child in the Bahamas, Exuma included, Anglican included, Cat Island included, to have a bright future and not have to depend on only working in a hotel. We want them to have opportunities. We support this bill. We see it as protecting Bahamians. We see it as growing the Bahamas. And Tall Pines, we're very proud, Mr. Speaker, to support this particular bill as we move the Bahamas forward. The Commercial Enterprise Bill of 2017. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As many, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Angliston.
That rarely happens. That rarely happens. I get shorter. Hmm? Oh, yes, please. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know what they're saying over there, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I rise on behalf of the good people of Angliston to contribute to this debate. And in doing so, I want to dedicate my contribution to the memory of the late Sir Arlington Butler, who was the first speaker in an independent Bahamas, and the late Ronnie Butler, who penned that famous anthem, Burma Road. And I think it's very appropriate that this is the way I begin my presentation in light of what we are doing today in this Parliament. And, Mr. Speaker, as you've heard, we will not support this legislation, Mr. Speaker. We will not. And it's not because, as the member for East Grand Bahama says, we don't really understand how good it is for us. It's because we understand very clearly what it is, Mr. Speaker. And I just want to hearken back to Marcus Garvey and a quote that I refer over and over, but it's very important. He says, a people without the knowledge of their past, history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. And this is very true, Mr. Speaker. In almost every single endeavor, it's important to know the journey and from whence we have come. So we understand very clearly what's happening today in this Parliament, Mr. Speaker. The bill tells us in the objects and reasons what this government is doing. And it says the bill seeks to, quote, liberalize, that's a word now, that's a term of art, liberalize the granting of work permits as a term of art to an establishment which wishes to establish itself in the Bahamas and requires work permits. That's from the bill itself, and that's what they said the reason and objects are. And East Grand Bahama, forgive me, but I'm going to refer to you quite a bit because I was here for your presentation. I missed a few, which I regret. No, I just want to, I believe that you will bring the ethos to where you're coming from, either intentionally or otherwise. The member for East Grand Bahama further elaborated and supports this liberalization by advising that this House, that we, in his words, we have to open up the economy, that we have to be wary of, and I quoted him while I sat here, protecting what we think is big when the rest of the world is moving in another direction. He admonishes us that we have to modernize, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we are therefore liberalizing our immigration policy today. When
the chair recognizes the honourable member for East Grand Bahama.
The member can say that I inferred, maybe, but she cannot say that that quote that she just gave is a quote from me. I do not believe that is true. In fact, I know it's not true. So, you know, again, I don't ask her to retract it because I take no offense for her. She's in flight. But it's important that if she's going to quote me correctly.
Mr. Speaker, the member will be very surprised. I have some other quotes because he said a lot of things while I was sitting here, and I wrote it down. So, and that is one of them, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, we are therefore liberalizing our immigration policy today. And we're being told that the whole world is moving in another direction. But the world I'm living in, I don't see that. I want to know what direction East Grand Bahama, talking about that the rest of the world, we see in Europe, in the UK, they just had Brexit. In the United States, we see the tightening there. The only place where we see these kind of things happening is in the region, where they're selling citizenship now in the region. Okay? So let's be accurate about where we are contextualizing our country. We are now falling more in line with them people down, some of our brothers and sisters down south, who are selling citizenship. And I'm saying that deliberately, Mr. Speaker, because I want the Bahamian people to know we got to watch this government. because they're on a track right now which is causing me grave concern, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I don't see the world going in no other direction. What I see is what the Bahamas is doing in line with some very offensive policies, in my view, that's happening in the region, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, what the rest of the world is in East Grand Bahama is referring to, and he's saying that he's describing a negative about our Bahamianization policy. Our Bahamianization policy is how we got to be who we are, you know. You're describing our policy as a negative in light of what's happening in the rest of the world. Our current policy. You are amending the policy. What do you think we're doing here? You're amending the policy.
Point of order. I don't know what the member is
Honourable Member for East Grand Bahama.
I don't know what the member is talking about. But again, she's referring to me and something about some Bahamian reversion, some Bahamianization policy or something of the sort. I don't believe I said anything about any Bahamianization policy, Mr. Speaker. What I said was that we have to look at what is happening around the world, and we have to be open to positive immigration. That is it. I said the status quo, and we cannot look back to 1967 as if we're still fighting some fight, recognizing that our economy is not growing. It has not grown for over 5 years, and if one wants to be honest, probably 10 years. In fact, we've had negative growth over the last 5 years. Negative growth. And so, Mr. Speaker, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about no citizenship and no immigration, no Bahamianization or walking back in immigration. If she's going to quote me again, quote me correctly. I don't have any difficulty defending what I say.
Speaker, the economic liberalization refers to a country opening up to the rest of the world with regards to trade, regulations. This is what it means in general. Taxation, other areas which affect business in the country. So I want to know which direction are we moving in this liberalization. This is a very critical first step, and we need to let the people of our country know what it is that's happening in here. East Grand Bahama admonishes us not to be like dogs in a manger. Well, I didn't know what that meant. I heard it, so I looked it up. What does it mean? I Googled dogs in a manger. And what it means is this. It says it is an ugly-natured person who prevents others from enjoying what would be an advantage to them, but is none to him. What an interesting expression. Freud was alive and kicking in here today, Mr. Speaker. I am not sure this is the allegory he wishes. Mr. Speaker, is he conceding that there's really and truthfully nothing in this for us? Because if he does, then we agree with him. Because, Mr. Speaker, we have had, no, Mr. Speaker, no, I'm not yielding, Mr. Speaker. I'm not yielding, no.
Honourable Member.
I'm asking a question and I can do that.
You're on the point of order.
What's your point of order?
Mr. Speaker, the member is horribly misleading this House. Horribly. He suggests that I indicated, implied, or anything of the nature that there's nothing in this bill for Bahamians. I spoke to that, Mr. Speaker. I spoke to that. So, I mean, honestly, she's getting to the point where she's going to have to withdraw. Because really and truly, she is horribly. Remember your orange pin. You know, she's horribly misleading. Horribly misleading. I don't want to be a part of the 3%, Mr. Speaker. Come on, man. Stick to the point.
That we should not be like dogs in a manger. I looked it up. And I'm saying, is that what you meant when you said it? Is that what you're saying?
Mr.
You
Speaker,
mean that?
Again, Mr. Speaker.
No, I'm speaking. No, I'm speaking.
No, you asked the question. Allow me to answer.
No, I'm not asking you. I'm asking at large. No, I'm not yielding.
No, you asked me the question.
Speaker, would you assist me? I'm not yielding for this member.
Honourable Member.
I'm asking the Bahamian people the
Honourable
question,
Member.
not you.
On a point of order. Are you on a point of order?
Mr. Speaker, the member could try all he wants, but we heard what he said, and it was a Freudian slip. And he said, we cannot be like dogs in a manger, Speaker. He said that. I didn't say that. I didn't even know what it meant. I had to look it up. So, Mr. Speaker, the F&M says, the F&M seems to be saying then that we think that we on this side are seeking to protect, what we are seeking to protect is big but really it's not. That we should not begrudge advantages to others just because we're not getting anything out of it. That we will not be dogs in a manger, Mr. Speaker. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, what is happening here today is very big. It's very important. It's a matter of grave concern for the direction of our beloved country, Mr. Speaker. We have yet to hear in this rushed debate the benefit to Bahamians. I heard some argument again from East Grand Bahama that somehow Bahamians will be, in my words, infected by the intellectual wealth or smarts of the foreign enterprise or individual, that there's some next budding Google-like founder or developer might be in that 250,000 range startup business. I find that very interesting, because Freud been working hard here today. Well, I might say, as a Bahamian, that the next Google founder developer might be from over the hill, sitting in a classroom earlier today, Oldbite, in E.P. Roberts Primary, I said, in Engliston. But we'll say Oldbite anywhere that a child could be right now, could be that. The point is we don't need to be infected. That's the point. Yes, infected, Speaker. Speaker, we should be talking about how we are going to stimulate and activate the creative genius of that Bahamian child. That's what we should be talking about. Not come in here and talk about our Bahamian people in the way in which has transpired in this debate, Speaker. Speaker, but instead, what is being proposed here is a sad viewpoint about the Bahamian people. This debate, Mr. Speaker, signifies a radical policy shift. Yes. 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 And it is a breakaway from successive administrations who saw the value in protecting and promoting Bahamian labor and securing opportunity for our people. A policy which favors Bahamians over all others in our own country, Mr. Speaker. That is why, when the member for Cat Island, Rumkey, in Salvador asked for this debate to be postponed, because we understand what this debate is about. It is a radical shift that goes back generations. And you've come in here to cause for a debate. You've rushed it, and you have postponed the Freedom of Information Act. You've postponed all kinds of the Listening Devices Act. All kinds of bills are being deferred because of concerns. But oh, not this one. Something so fundamentally and so potentially impactful to the future development of our country, the dreams of our children. A shift from an age-old, tried and proven policy to protect Bahamians in their own country. A policy that the Minister of Labor himself, and I'm going to quote that, the Minister Dion Smith, who's a folks. No, Dion Folks, sorry. No, I'm not confused, are you? Dion Folks, he said, and he said this in early days, he said that the Prime Minister directed him, on a radio show, that no work permits would be issued where Bahamians are qualified for the job. No foreigner should get a work permit where there are qualified Bahamians to fill the position. That's the Bahamianization policy, Mr. Speaker. So this is still policy? Okay, we come back to that, Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, he said that this was the policy. But we've come in here now. They ask me what is the difference. I want to get to it, but the difference is this, is that this unit will give a certificate, which is actually the effect of giving a work permit to these people. I mean, you say you apply to immigration, if they don't apply in 14 days, they deemed to have had it. So really, in truth, the unit, whoever in this unit, will be issuing work permits on an automatic basis, not with no labor certificate, none of that stuff. Automatically, Bahamians will be ousted from opportunity in these areas. This is not consistent with the policy of our country, Mr. Speaker. You're going to get to the businesses that you've targeted, Mr. Speaker. And so, Mr. Speaker, this is a radical departure from our immigration policy. This is fundamental what is happening here today. This legislation says that they will give work permits whether or not a Bahamian can fill the position. That's what they're saying, Speaker. Speaker, there should be widespread discussion and feedback on this bill, including from ordinary Bahamians. And Yamakro, I heard you said about downloading from the internet, but I'm not talking about that kind of interaction with Bahamian people. This kind of policy shift should be the subject of dialogue and discussion with our people throughout this country, Mr. Speaker. But then again, Mr. Speaker, the FNM told us that it is the people's time. But we admit, you never said which people. I was assuming you meant the Bahamian people. But you don't mean the Bahamian people, because we have not seen anything in what you have done which indicates that you are committed to the interests of our people. And Mr. Speaker, I want to say, Speaker, you, the Free National Movement government, has no mandate from the electorate to tamper with our Bahamianization policy. You have no mandate. You have no right to modernize in your words, or whatever words you use to justify foreigners coming into our country and getting automatic work permits. Speaker, and you want to give work permits whether or not there is a bright young Bahamian or any qualified Bahamian living in his or her own country who cannot access economic opportunities, Speaker. And Speaker, the member, I have them saying about there will be no direct competition, Speaker.
Honourable Member for Elizabeth, are you on a point of order?
On a point of order, Mr. Speaker. Very simply, Mr. Speaker, the member for Engliston continues to mislead not only this Honourable House but the public by stating that work permits will be issued in the event, even in the event that there's a qualified Bahamian. There is no narrative in this bill that says that. She is inferring, which is a very long stretch, Mr. Speaker.
There's no process that I know of. This thing goes to this unit, whatever this unit is. In immigration, there's a process. It's transparent. Now, this going to this unit, and so, no, I'm trying to figure out now how the labor certificate, the whole purpose of the labor certificate is to identify Bahamians. This is eliminating that. So I hear what the member is saying, misleading, but we know where the misleading is happening. And the misleading is a very diabolical nature, what I see happening here, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, yes, not everything. Really? Then you need to change your practices and stop being diabolical with the Bahamian people, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the point I am making is that this is a radical departure. They do not have the mandate of the Bahamian people to do something like this. This has not even been properly articulated in the public domain. I saw a couple business articles in the business section of the Tribune, and I understand what was going on there. That was, softening the ground for this debate. But in terms of going out there and actually speaking to people and letting the Bahamian people know what it is you are seeking to do, that has not happened. And this reminds me of, in a lot of ways, the BTC giveaway, except it's 10 times, a million times more serious, more fundamental. Speaker, on the issue of the bill, just to give a summary, because pardon me? Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, this bill applies to any person who's specified as a commercial enterprise. Now, the schedule of industry that this refers to is very interesting, and as has been said by one or two speakers over there, very broad. So, but the other point I want to make about when I think that the point was made before I get this, Mr. Speaker, was that there'll be no direct competition with Bahamians. But if you argue Bahamians are not in the industry per se, so the direct competition is not the issue. The issue is closing the door on opportunity. That's the issue. So this talk about competition with Bahamians is to obfuscate what is really happening, Mr. Speaker. What is happening is this policy now, which is a departure from the normal, transparent policy which allows a qualified Bahamian in his or her own country, the only place we got, but allow them to access opportunities. This particular departure will now do away with that, whether the person has the ability, whether they're techie or any of those issues, because this unit will issue work permits on the face, right there at carte blanche, Mr. Speaker. And Speaker, let me just go over the areas that they say. I heard you saying it's not right, but I'm quoting your words. The dog in the manger. Speaker, the areas that they're covered, and they're very broad. And the question is, what...
Honourable member for Marco City. The chair recognizes the honourable member. Are you on a point of order?
Yeah, to follow up on the point raised by the Minister of Health, by Elizabeth. 8, under application for permit, it reads, Mr. Speaker, any person entering the Bahamas pursuant to Section 7.3 shall within 30 days of such entry submit a complete application for a work permit to the Department of Immigration.
Right.
So so what concerned me about what you're saying, why I tend to agree with Elizabeth, it is misleading if you say to the public that the granting of a work permit is automatic, despite the fact that it is.
Don't try that. Don't try that, David.
Let me finish the point. Despite the fact that it is saying quite clearly that you must apply to the same folks you're saying are now irrelevant in the process. So just to finish it, and then on the issue of the 14 days, the only point being made here, this isn't saying because 14 days is mentioned that no matter what the investigation turns up, the person will get the permit. It's simply saying that in the event that the government does not respond, it's automatic. And this does not mean that other established companies that exist now, because I've certainly seen what's online, let me just finishing? No, let me, I'm sorry, I'm normally an expert on where my words should go, so just let me complete it for a minute. I'm saying, but I think a point of order trumps that. Just give me a chance. No, it's a point of order. Sorry, you don't. No, it's a point of order, Mr. Speaker.
He's on a point of order.
I'm a point.
It's my time. What is this point of order, please?
The point of order is that the statements that being made are misleading the House.
Which rule is that, Mr. Speaker? No, the member should indicate the rule, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah.
Speaker, I'm quite aware of what the legislation says, Speaker, and so I don't need the member to rehash it for me.
No, I just wanted to complete the point.
Speaker, the point I'm making is this, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member.
Mr. Speaker, you're going to find the rule? But I hope you do that when my time comes. The Speaker will find the rule for him, no problem.
I'm not finding the rule for him. I thought you were raising the issue on whether or not.
I'm rising on a point of. Sorry,
honourable member, rise on a point of order. If his point of order is that the member who is speaking is misleading the House.
I was wondering if the member knew the rule. If he doesn't have it.
Are you going on a technicality or the substance?
So, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. So I'd like to just.
Right. You finished?
No, I'm not. So again, I just want to say, Mr. Speaker, to the public by way of you, that the member for Angliston is fully aware that a person having received a certificate to conduct a business that does not exist in this jurisdiction must follow the law of the country, which is to apply through the normal channels for a work permit. So in no way is the granting of the certificate saying that you will be granted a work permit, because there can be circumstances that the Department of Immigration discover that will preclude you, will prevent you from receiving a work permit. So it is not correct that it is automatic. That's the point I'm making.
Speaker, I think the member, no disrespect to him, he needs to read the legislation. What this is saying, Mr. Speaker, in a nutshell, and I can go through the sections, but I maybe might learn to do it more effectively. I just want to summarize it. You apply to the investment board, which creates this unit, which is some subset, I assume. I don't know who this unit is. They apply, and once they satisfy this unit, that that it falls within the criteria of this bill, which says that it's whatever, it's the scheduled industries, etc., that it will issue a certificate. Once that certificate is issued, within 30 days, they must apply for a work permit. If the Director of Immigration does not reply within 14 days, which is 10 working days, I assume, Okay. It could be 14 working days. It could be 30 working days. It could be, we're in the real world here. We're in the real world here. That if the director does not respond, that it will be deemed that that person has a work permit. So the effect of this is after 14 days, it is deemed, and you don't need to get up no more. So, Mr. Speaker, this is what, so to the member for East Grandma, say immigration better do his job. But the people are sensible, you know, we could read between the lines. We know what they're doing, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the areas that are described. So, Mr. Speaker, that is what I mean when I said automatic. Because once that certificate is given and you apply, if immigration don't apply in 14 days, too bad, too sad, you got your work permit. Speaker. No, Mr. Speaker. No. I'm going to get, you already explained yourself. I'm going to finish it. Speaker, the areas in the first schedule, Mr. Speaker,
you want a point of order?
Insurance.
Honorable member.
Speaker.
The member's on a point of order.
What is the point of order?
Point of order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, again, the member continues to mislead the House, restating the same fallacy that she's been stating before. If you look at 9, under compliance and licensing and regulatory requirement, it reads, notwithstanding the issuance of the said certificate, any specified commercial enterprise, and where required, its employees shall comply with the terms and conditions set by the relevant regulatory agencies or professional regulatory body in the Bahamas. In much the same way the person has to comply with all other regulations. Just to go back to a point one of my colleagues raised earlier about town meetings being held. The new business have to, if it is required by a subdivisions act, to go ahead and hold a town meeting with residents. In the same way, the person must apply to the Department of Regulation, of Immigration. So when she talks about 14 days, what she's failing to say is that many things can happen within the 14 days, including the denial of a work permit. And I think it's unfair for her to leave on the record that it is automatic when clearly it says that the Department of Immigration has a window to act in to determine for or against a work permit, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member.
I hear all this thing about where you don't subdivision and all that. I don't see that in the bill. But I'm sure the member has information that we don't have because he sits in the cabinet. But I'm talking about what's in the law right here. But as it relates to the issue of what I'm referring to, look at Section 8, which deals with application for work permits. So this provision provides that if you enter and you're a in-house professional or an executive, you can work, as the member Caroline reminds me, for 30 days with nothing. No work permit, no nothing, no nothing, no nothing. Then, however, you apply for a work permit. The Director of Immigration shall determine any work permit applied for not later than 14 working days after the filing thereof. We clear on that? 14 working days after the filing thereof, and the payment of the application fee, failing which the work permit shall be deemed, did I use that word, deemed? The work permit shall be deemed to have been granted. I don't want to get stuck on that, Mr. Speaker, and I wish the member would just allow me to complete, because the law is very clear what is happening here. Once you get that certificate, you straight, basically. 14 days, the Speaker, within 14 days, the Speaker, sorry? You do. This allows for it. This allows for it. You ain't read it, eh? You didn't read this?
Point of order, Mr.
Honorable Member.
Speaker, what's the point
The
of
chair
order?
recognizes the member for Yamacraw.
I thank the Honorable.
Are you on a point of order, Honorable Member?
Yes. I thank the Honorable member for yielding. Mr. Speaker, and I rise on a point of order.
Yes.
I respectfully submit that the Honorable member is misleading the House. There's nowhere in this act that ouses where there's a provision that outs the provisions of the Immigration Act. Okay. There's nowhere in this act that you would find a section that saying notwithstanding the provision of the Immigration Act, that someone would be granted something. The provision is clear. That, okay. and not that you would work for the 30 days. You're allowed to enter, and you must make the application. Please, you must make the application.
That's not what this is.
And once you, and it is clear.
No.
So the Immigration Department has their discretion to issue the work permit is there, because you will make an application to that organization. They will then have to determine that application. Even if there's not a response within 14 days and you're granting the provision at the end of it, it still says that they retain the right to reject it based on public safety, public morality, or national security. And I was clear in my submission as to how broad that is.
Right.
But this act does not, I want the PMA people to be clear, it does not oust and it does not take away the power of the Immigration Department to do what it has to do. And the spirit and the breath of the Immigration Act is that they must determine in these circumstances whether or not there's a qualified being. They must go through that whole activity. Now, we all know that in the Bahamas, and that's why I use, just one moment, why I use Bahama. When you bring in questions, sometimes the managers of the managers of the institution are allowed to work. But there's nothing in this act, as I said before, that ouses or reduces the obligation of the Immigration Department to do its work.
The chair recognizes the honourable member for Cat Island on
Section 7.3 of this bill says, and I read, where such certificate, which the member of Angus has been talking about, once you get the certificate in hand, where such certificate has been issued, the person who receives the same and any in-house professional designated by him in writing may freely, what's the word? Freely enter the Bahamas for the purpose of setting up or conducting such specified commercial enterprise in reliance upon the said certificate. The immigration,
For that purpose, for that purpose, it does not say that you start to work or set up.
Well, that's what it's saying. That's what it's saying.
Mr. Speaker,
for the purpose of setting up
is to make your application within 30 days.
Mr. Speaker,
there's a provision in this act that clearly says application for work permit. This act, the breath and spirit of this act does not oust the Immigration Act or the duties and responsibilities
to the government
of the Immigration Department.
He's the advisor.
He's the senior member
of the government.
Honourable members, two members cannot be on the floor at the same time. Honourable member, both members resume your seats. Both members. Honourable member, I ask for both members to resume the seat. Honourable member, resume your seat. The honourable member for Angleston, are you ready to continue?
I'm not finished. I'm not finished. And I allow me to continue because the word is quite clear. Once you get the certificate, you could come into this country freely and you're coming into work. The Minister of Finance admits this. He agrees this. And I don't know why his members are not understanding it. You're coming here for setting up or conducting the business. That's what Section 7.3 says. Now, once you're here, it requires you within 30 days. Now, once you enter freely, and you're either setting up your business or you're conducting the business, you are now required within 30 days to apply for the work permit. So you can stay here for at least 30 days before you apply. That displaces the process of the immigration of which the member is speaking about. And it's dishonest for the member who is the advisor of the government to say otherwise. And the member of Finance has agreed with this from his table, from sitting down there.
Honourable member for Yamakro.
If dishonesty bites some of us, we would not feel it. I haven't identified anybody, whether or not they be in this house or outside of this house, right? I stick by my point that it says you can enter for the purposes of doing that. A part of the purpose is you must make your application. Until this act does not oust the power of the Immigration Department to give that license. And he knows better.
Honourable member for
Speaker.
Angleston.
Speaker, I believe I could read, okay, Mr. Speaker? I could read. I'm going to read this again about this, what the role of the Director of Immigration is. The Director of Immigration shall determine any work permit applied for not later than 14 days after the filing thereof, and the payment of the application fee. Failing which, that's if he doesn't do his job in 14 days, failing which the work permit shall be deemed to have been granted, so he gets his work permit, and may only be later revoked if the director has reasonable grounds for so doing on the basis of public safety, public morality, or national security. But we're talking about immigration policy and work permits, the labor certificate, the process that protects Bahamians in the workplace. That is what I'm talking about, Mr. Speaker. So this is what we're talking about. And they made me work hard, Mr. Speaker, and that is why, Mr. Speaker, I decry this process to bring this legislation in this way, because you see the debate that ensued just now about it, and certainly what has been advocated on that side, but what the words on here say and the meaning of these words are not shared on this side, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the other point I want to make in this legislation, so we're not interested in this issue about competition with Bahamians, because the issue is not competition. The issue is whether you are denying opportunity. We now know that the whole purpose of this legislation, we talk about the zoning, but we know the whole purpose is the work permit. The work permit, it's an incentive to the industry. So don't come in here and try to, why are we trying to make the Bahamian people believe they don't know what they know, they don't see what they see, and why are we doing this? Let's be honest with the people. This is what you're doing. But the other concern I have, Mr. Speaker, is this point that was made about how you're going to train some Bahamians, and Bahamians are going to transfer technology. But look at the section. The section is very interestingly worded. And I'm very disappointed in the wording, because at least you could have do something here, Mr. Speaker. This is what they say here. Every application to the board shall be in a prescribed form as shown in the schedule, etc., etc. And then it says that specify the nature of the proposed commercial enterprise, its staffing needs, inclusive of the number of work permits. So this is a work permit bill, man. That's what you're doing here. We're incentivizing with labor in our country. And then you say here, this is what they say now, work permits which may be required, and such training and capacity building opportunities as may be agreed. This is new. As may be agreed. We now got to agree with them. How long, when they can train Bahamians and they get in work permit just like that? I'm trying to figure this out. Why couldn't we have said mandated? You are mandated during this process to train Bahamians. I'd feel a little better about this legislation. But the language is so loose and so uncommitted in terms of what it means to the Bahamian people. And so I wanted to point that out, because I'm very disappointed in this particular clause, and you could have done better. You're doing bad on the whole, but you could have done a lot better with that one, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, we had similar legislation. Speaker, we saw similar incentives with the Hawksbill Creek Agreement in the early days. And then the argument was niche. And I got a little distracted with this issue of niche. These are very broad categories. So I don't know how you could have niche with such broad categories. For example, wealth management. It's huge. What is that? That could probably be 1,000,001 things. But you're talking about niche. What is a niche? And then the thing I'm interested in is the boutique health facility. What is that? Because I was saying it doesn't say medical, it says health. So what is anticipated with this, and what level of competition are we going to see? Massages? Oh, spas? Well, once the people in this country know that we're now going to be opening up for spas in our country, and Bahamians do very well in spas, and if that's what you mean, I don't know. Call centers. My Lord, you need to give work permit to answer the phone for Bahamians. We're phone experts. Nobody deals with the phone better than Bahamians. Speaker? Some Speaker? As I indicated, the debate today signifies a radical policy shift far removed from what they promised. They accused us of bringing in the Chinese, but we know that they brought, I mean, just the last election, how we did this, that, and annexing the Chinese. But we know that, that it was the Free National Movement that brought the Chinese into our economy, that gave out the 8,000 work permits, and then in opposition talked about the Chinese and the Chinese and the Chinese. We now know, Mr. Speaker, that the people have to face the reality. This is not, these people are not consistent about what it is they believe in and what is their principles on these things. Because you say one thing, and then you come right back and you do something completely different, Mr. Speaker. What you're doing now, in my view, is institutionalizing the marginalization of the Bahamian people. And you're doing it in a way that I say is effectively under the radar. Because even though we're on TV right now, and it's transpiring in plain sight, I don't believe it's any accident that this has been quietly pursued by this government. Because you know how Bahamians feel about this issue. You know how they feel about this issue. So, Speaker, this F&M government is seeking in this House today, and I want Bahamians everywhere to hear me, Mr. Speaker, to uproot what was heretofore an entrenched policy that protected Bahamians in their own economy. This slams the door shut in a variety of areas, and in the area of those, in respect to those areas, Mr. Speaker, what is interesting, the minister responsible, I think it's Minister of Immigration, I believe, has the ability to add new categories with the stroke of a pen. So today we're talking about the first schedule, but tomorrow, next week, next month, we don't know what minister can put in there, what he can write to add more areas for more work permits in our economy, Mr. Speaker. I have an objection to that, Mr. Speaker. It should be clear and define what you're doing, but we don't support it in any event. But you're further making this muddy and murky by giving the minister the capacity to add more and more areas of the economy for automatic work permits in this country, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, and I want to ask, and I'm serious about this. People come in, they get their work permits, they set up their businesses. Speaker, I think they're going to have to track permanent residence and citizenship applications because I'm very concerned. Yeah. I'm concerned. And I know that the minister is going to speak, and I would like him to put on the record the position of this government on economic citizenship, Mr. Speaker. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, the policy is one that has been respected by successive administrations, the PLP, the F&M, Pinling, Ingram, Christie. It took the member for Kalani to come and bring this type of legislation. My brother from over the hill who sold newspapers and sold pants. Come in this parliament now and bring legislation that reduces opportunity for the Bahamian people, Mr. Speaker, potentially. So, Speaker, as so rightly pointed out by East Grand Bahama, it was the policies of post-1967 in the first majority rule government that through deliberate policy, which was primarily immigration policy, but which necessitated education policy. That's what we should be talking about. How do we prepare our people? Not coming and tell me we ain't ready. I don't want no government tell me my people ain't ready. And so we got to give opportunity elsewhere, Mr. Speaker. Get on your feet and say we are not ready for opportunity in this country. Speaker, the Bahamianization policy helped to move a people from being undeveloped or from what I call social and economic retardation, from a pre-1967 situation. You know how it was. You couldn't get beyond grade 6. You couldn't work in banks. Let me read Marcus Garvey to you again. Let me read Marcus Garvey. A people without knowledge of their history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. You want us to forget. You want us to forget the journey. You want us to see this as some nicey little thing. You don't want us to understand where we're coming from. Speaker. And the Bahamianization policy, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, would you assist me, please? The Bahamianization policy was brought about by aggressive,
honorable members,
courageous, and deliberate policies to redress the underdevelopment of our people. Speaker, this bill destroys in a major way the fundamental principle of labor in this country. This is not a niche policy. This is not. This is a gouging out of the foundation policy upon which this country was built. It's a very, and you're smirking over there, but it's not funny. And I hope the Bahamian people are listening to what you're doing here, Speaker. This is not using immigration as a tool of national development as claimed, but using immigration to push back the Bahamian people. That's what you're doing now. Whether you intend to do that, that's what you're doing, Speaker. Yeah, because you say we ain't ready. You say we ain't ready. And then you told them, you're saying in this legislation, when the foreigners come here to open up their businesses, they don't have to train Bahamians. You say, maybe we could talk about it. That's what you say in this legislation, Speaker. Change the language then. The language does not make it mandatory. The policy right now makes it mandatory. You must. You must. So, Mr. Speaker, contrary to what is being advanced by this government, because what the member for East Grand Bahama is saying, he's saying we must loosen the laws. It might have been Yamakra, loosen the laws to help Bahamians develop. So in other words, loosen the immigration laws, bring in foreigners, and Bahamians will develop. That's the theory. Whereas historically, it was the opposite way around. That you tighten the laws to protect Bahamians, and then Bahamians develop. And we did well. We did very well post-67 as a result of that, Mr. Speaker. The arguments in here are upside down, Mr. Speaker. And we know what will happen when the protections disappear. It is not correct for this government to make such a fundamental assault on the Bahamian people without dialogue, Mr. Speaker. I am reminded and understanding how this government sees the world, that it was the same FNM government that decided that they were going to amend the land law, the Movable Property Act, and bring in the International Persons Landholding Act. And as a result, we know what happened. We don't even know. We don't have a clue how many thousands of acres have been sold. And that's what the Free National Movement introduced a policy, which was a radical shift from an earlier policy, which used land as an instrument of economic development. Now we're talking about labor as an instrument of economic development, Speaker. This is very serious, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, this structural change, in my view, is inflicting psychic damage on the Bahamian people. So contrary to what East Grand Bahama is saying, we are indeed doing something big. And what we are seeking to protect on this side is something very important, and it has tremendous value. Believe it or not, it has tremendous value. Yes. And I think the Bahamian people will agree. I hope they're listening to know what you all are doing in this parliament tonight, without dialogue, without discussion, without warning. It wasn't in your speech from the throne. You didn't put it in your manifesto. But you come in here and you rush it through. We asked for an adjournment. You're putting everything else and other things in the committee. You cannot do it with this. You want to get it through. And that makes me, see, when the Free National Movement amended the land laws, they did it because they were catering to vested interests at that time. And the vested interest at that time, what happened? You got a problem with that, Senance? The vested interest at the time was, I believe, I think it was Grand Bahama. It was the Port Authority that made certain demands on the government. So the land laws were changed. So I want to know, I'm only asking a question. I'm asking at large, I'm asking rhetorically, what is motivating this government to bring about this kind of legislation, which is marginalizing Bahamian labor in this country, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, the member said zero growth. My goodness. My goodness.
Zero growth.
Wow. Speaker, I feel disappointed that the government says that it has run out of ideas, and the only way it can run out of ideas is to sell out the labor of this country to stimulate the economy, Mr. Speaker. And that has been the oldest argument in the book. It was the argument of the UBP to give work permits, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members.
So, Mr. Speaker, and Mr. Speaker, you know, I hear the member say zero growth, but he has not said, I have not heard anyone here say what the impact is going to be. Because normally you can say you can create, we anticipate this is going to create 1,000 jobs. It's going to have effect on the GDP or something. We hear none of that. All we're hearing now, Mr. Speaker, is that they got zero growth. They've run out of ideas. They don't give up land as an incentive for economic development. Now they can give up labor. My Lord, what next? What next are you all going to do to try and come up with an idea in this country? Speaker? Afraid? Do I look like I'm afraid to you? You better look good. So, Mr. Speaker, I think it's very unfortunate that the Free National Movement has put us back in, is beginning to take us back, put us back into a vicious cycle that we were extricated from in 67. The Free National Movement has taken us back there. Now it's land, now it's labor, Mr. Speaker. And, Speaker, so I am asking, I heard, I think it was the member for Yamakra said that it's symbiosis and not parasitic. But I missed the symbiosis part. I've not heard anything from this government as to what value this is going to bring. They're telling us that someone can come and set up a business for $250,000, be a sole proprietor. I heard that, a sole proprietor. And that is somehow going to take us from zero growth to something else, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I am asking this government to leave this bill in committee. Do not attempt to pass this legislation. The Bahamian people are not aware that you are interfering with their immigration policy in a fundamental way. You do not have a mandate. We will not support it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
As many? The chair recognizes the honourable member for St. Anne's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As normal, I rise on behalf of the good people of St. Anne's and to bring to a close the debate we've had today. Thank you, Carmichael. I'll use however this works. And in the process, thank you. This is high tech. High tech. Thank you. I'd like to thank the people of St. Anne's for having the trust to re-elect me to this honourable place. I also, Mr. Speaker, would like to adopt the condolences that have been issued to Sir Ali, Ronnie Butler, and many others, and adopt the words of previous speakers. Mr. Speaker, the debate today has been very interesting on both sides. The last speaker ended up with words to the effect that this bill is a vicious circle to take us back where we were in 1967. And I'm paraphrasing. I am paraphrasing. I happen, like you, to write it down when you were speaking. So we're taking vicious circle, which we were taken out of in 1967, into the... Fine, I'm paraphrasing, different words, land and labor. You know, that's a good place for me to start because the first item on the first schedule is captive insurance. And it was the PLP's immigration policy in their first term of office that caused the captive insurance business to leave the Bahamas and go to Bermuda. So let me start my speech there. Bermuda ate our lunch on captive insurance because of our immigration policy by the then PLP government. And it was wealthy because of it, and they have high wages because of it, because we used a restrictive immigration, regressive policy in the interest of nationalization of the Bahamas. And now say that was in the best interest of Bahamians. I open on that point, Mr. Speaker. I just want to go down quickly some of the issues. So I've talked about captive insurance. We lost it to Bermuda. Reinsurance, we don't have it. Period. Zero. No reinsurance. Arbitration. Very few cases. Most of it's local. I, Mr. Speaker, had the fortune of being in Singapore the other day, and I took time out to visit the arbitration center. They do some 11,000 arbitrations a year. We are currently having circulation a new arbitration bill. An arbitration bill which will deal with foreign arbitration based on the unitrial model of Singapore, which I have a colleague that I was talking to in London who does 3,000 arbitration matters himself, and he's a second home owner here in the Bahamas. That's the type of business we want to attract here. International trade. That is what my ministry does, brings international trade here. We need to set up. What do you talk about? What are you talking about? Pharmachem or some of the industries in Freeport. We talk about international arbitrage. Not here at all. Zero Bahamians in all these categories currently employed in that area. Zero. Maritime trade. This ain't fly fishing. Let's get our head out the sand. Or, you know, it was beauty. I'm looking out of my window in Singapore. I saw this number of ships registered there. Do you realize, Mr. Speaker, 85% of the inbound trade to China goes through Singapore. 35% comes out of Singapore, and Singapore's an island about the size of the Bahamas. About the size of Nassau. About the size of Nassau. That is where we want to be. And how do you think Singapore got there? How do you think the United States got where they were after the Second World War? It was Canada, any of these countries, Australia, Ireland. It was because they had progressive policies, which included progressive immigration policies to grow a country. Data storage and warehousing. We make the joke about call centers. The other day my phone rings. Ladies calling me from Barbados to tell me that my Bahamian-issued credit card is overdue. And Bahamians could do that job? Please. It moved out under your administration. It went down there. And that's the shrinking of our economy. So we have to look at the fact it's a number one. It's immigration policy, cost of doing business, cost of electricity. You had your chance to talk. Cost of doing, and these are all issues, if the other side would care to listen to what my quarterback has been saying all along, and members of his team, is as we go along, we are talking about the ease of doing business. We have an ease of doing business committee, and the member for East Grand Bahama showed you a bunch of laws that will come here very quickly that has been written in the last several months to get those low-hanging fruits that deal with VAT, business license, and the other ones that are making it very difficult for Bahamians to do business, and were pieces of legislation put in place by the other side when they were government. So we are going to roll back some of those regressive pieces of legislation that they put in place so Bahamians don't have to suffer. And when you talk about the mandate, there's 35 over this side and 4 over that side, and that is the mandate. And the immigration laws that we're dealing with, unlike what the other side tried to say, are not entrenched provisions of our law. They are changeable. So they tried to make you believe they were entrenched. So another misconception, misdirection, whatever you want to call it, whatever they're trying to do. I just want to use one that's very good. Aviation registration. We've talked a long time about getting aviation registration here. It is a huge business. It's nothing new. Zero business at the moment. We talked about aviation mechanics. I think it was somewhere here. Aviation approved maintenance operations. No one here doing that on a large scale. Can you imagine if we have, like the shipyard in Grand Bahama, if we have the world's Dreamliners, 777s, 787s, or 380s flying in here to be repaired, engines dropped, bolted off, bolted back on. An engine on one of these jets is over $1 million a year. We don't have people that can repair these engines here. You know, the other day, just by way of anecdotal evidence, I got an application for a work permit. And in case you all know, this Immigration Act, the member for Zuma wanted to call it Brent's Act. That's what they really want to get at, you know. Brent issuing work permits. South Andrews. That's really what they want to get at, is the fact that they're worried about what work permits the minister will grant. Well, the minister under our laws, in most cases, means the cabinet. It's not the minister. But anyway, so let me get back. So I got an application for a work permit for a helicopter pilot. Immigration said, I need a labor certificate. I ain't got no helicopter pilots in the Bahamas, especially not one for an extremely wealthy non-Bahamian who lives here, second home when we're here, who is concerned about his health, his welfare, about flying his helicopter. It's not unreasonable to expect that when you have that high net worth person, that they don't bring in a lot of their people around them. And that is what we talk about, liberalization. If I'm coming in as a high net worth person, you don't think I shouldn't be allowed to bring in my PA, my administrative assistant? How are we going to grow this country? One of the areas that we face, and we had the immigration policy's been like this for years. You can get permanent residence, since the member for Angleston asked me, it's been a long time, permanent residence with the right to work in your own business. We have been granting that for years. Still granted. They granted, I granted it before, I'm granting it again, subject to cabinet approval. So we attract people to come here, bring their business. Now, one of the businesses we're going to look at, Mr. Speaker, is headquartering, big business. Let's get headquarters of international firms to come here. We may get a Google. We may get one, but we may get also one opened the other day. It was in the newspapers. They headquarter here. They bring their senior management here, and when we do that, they will be employing Bahamians in different levels, which will gradually rise up through the year. For instance, the casino is a good example. Resorts International used to have, when they had the casino, about 80% of the croupiers, if not higher, were non-Bahamians. Now, if you go to the casinos, very few of the people in the casinos are no, right, that's fine, fine, it's fine. We're not, that's the point. I'm glad Engelson jumped in, because this act, for instance, is one of the first acts that talks about requirements and training in the law. In the law. It's not a point of order. It's not a point. I'm not, Mr. Speaker, I'm not yielding. I'm not yielding. I'm not yielding. I'm not yielding. You quoted it many times yourself. Section 5(2), which you guys went on ad nauseam. Every application should be in prescribed form. Prescribed form. Accompanied by a business plan. Very simple. You come in. Let me just walk you through how this is supposed to work. You come in with a business plan. So you say what you're going to do. You're going to identify. So let's say I want to do one of the things in the schedule. Aviation approved maintenance operation. Let's just use that one as a. You come and you say, I intend to set up an operation where I'm going to repair jet engines for. Let's start something smaller. Citation jets. Let's start with something a little bit smaller. Cessnas, whatever, the multi-million-dollar aircraft. You come in and you specify the nature of your proposed commercial operation. You talk about its staffing. I will need 20 people. I'll need 50 people. Inclusive of the number of work permits. Nothing unusual about that. When Mr. Kersner came into Atlantis, we talked about the question of the number of work permits. At one point, he was given 20 work permits for whatever he wanted. Whatever he wanted. And he used those, in some cases, for places where there was a Bahamian. He used one for a doorman. And I remember they picked up a and it turned out they were happy the doorman came in because he transferred his knowledge as a doorman to other Bahamians who are now making better tips because they know how to deal with that. So it talks about the number of work permits. Okay? Then it talks about training. If you didn't see it, read it. I know you can read. And such training and capacity building opportunities as may be agreed. That is by an agreement between the government of the Bahamas and the proposed investor. And when you go into when you come out of this, you then have an agreement between the government of the Bahamas and the proposed investor with regard to one of these issues in the schedule. Once you do that, it's similar. Well, it's also similar to if the member for Engleson will recall, when you apply for something like through the Bahamas Investment Authority, there are certain things that they go through. They go through know your customer. They look at your bank account, whether you have enough money to do the funds, whether you're a good person, your references, etc. This will always all be done in this format. Now, we made a big fuss about moving to immigration. One of the things we have to do in this country is take that same Bahamas Investment Authority certificate and make sure when the government gives someone a permit under BIA, they can take that certificate as evidence that they have complied with your KY, your Know Your Customer routine, and all other obligations to another ministry and break down the silos that currently exist between ministries, which... Mr. Speaker, why I get frustrated on that point, when I swear some people in, like I'm going to do tomorrow, I'm going to do a swearing, and they stand up, they say the oath, they sing the national anthem, they do the pledge, we go through all of this, the minister responsible hands them a certificate that says they're Bahamian. And they go away proudly. You know what they do, the first thing they do? They walk straight to the passport office and present this certificate. And what does the passport office do? Right there and then, within a day, issues them a passport for the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, based on that certificate. That is where this government wants to go, is going, and will go very shortly. At lunchtime today, I went to immigration. I was dealing with permits that had applied on November the 7th. We need to do better. November the 7th this year for work permits are on my desk. That's where we have to go to. If it was up to me, I wouldn't have been like the former minister and renewed the lease for the current building for another 5 years. I'd have found another building more efficient than that building to move into. But I'm stuck with that, and I can make the best of it. So let's not talk about making immigration more efficient. We will make it more efficient. We're going to make it more efficient. And the member for Killarney has already announced, and again pushback. Heaven forbid you have another format of giving someone citizenship without going through the bureaucracy of a minister. Let me just tell the public for their purposes. No application for citizenship or permanent residency reaches the cabinet of the Bahamas unless the minister responsible, in this case me, signs off on it. I could lose that file. I could not like you. I could do a bunch of things, and you would never get your time of day before the cabinet. I ain't going into Darcy Ryan, which had to take the government to court, and the government effectively said, no, you're entitled, Mr. Ryan, to your citizenship, but I cannot order the government of the Bahamas to issue you your certificate because of separation of powers or however that way. That is what the FNM are trying to say. So no political animal can tell that person he can't get his time of day before the government of the Bahamas. That's what this progressive government is doing. And if you want to call that a regressive immigration policy, I believe personally the people watching and listening have a better idea, and that's why they created the FNM government today as a mandate for change. And someone talked about the manifesto. The manifesto says in it very clearly, make a better life for Bahamians, increase the economy, do what is right, transparency, less victimization, less corruption. All of those things are right in the and this is part of that. You worried about 14 days of getting approval? You've already got the certificate from the investment authority. The work has been done before it gets there. So fine, what you do is you give the person permission. You already decided you don't have this industry here. No Bahamians employed here. You then decide, I want that industry. So you allow the man, you give him a certificate, and he's allowed to come in to set up. We all know how long it takes to set up. Find a house. You know, under the current regime, you can't get a car license without a national insurance number. You can't open a bank account without a national insurance number. How do you get a national insurance number? You go to national insurance and wait a long time to get a national insurance number. So all of this is happening on this, the difference between what they're saying and the granting of a work permit. So when you go down, you start, you rent a house, you find the computer equipment or whatever you need, the chair, the carpet, the dustbin, everything else. You get your national insurance number, you open your bank account. All this is happening, so we're not waiting another 6 months while you're waiting for all this to happen. Your application goes to immigration, and hopefully by immigration sees a certificate from BIA, and you get your immigration permit. There's no need for any interference. If the director of immigration wants to interfere, he can interfere in that time because the Know Your Customer work has been done before that certificate was granted. Before you even get there. Now, if we want to say, well, immigration can't do that, those days you can ask for the labor certificate too. But that's why the honourable member for Elizabeth brought that labor certificate issue here. Some point we've got to open up on labor certificates too. Let me give a very mundane example. Bahamians don't like to be gardeners. I think we can accept that. So we get a labor certificate for every single person who comes to the Bahamas to apply to be a gardener. We got to change that too. Or farmer. Or live-in maid. There are some categories we accept that there are no Bahamians that want to do that job. Now, when we get in a gray area, I accept when we get in a gray area when we get up to some of the professionals. But we also have to progress to that, because if we are going to attract business, and this is the real issue, we're getting hit on the head with ease of doing business, which I've already said we have a committee to do. Then we heard from the other side borrowing something to do with exchange control. We're working on that too. It's the view of the member of Killarney that we should open up exchange control. Oh no, maybe we shouldn't open up. That's the wrong thing. Opening up liberalization. Wrong words. We need to liberalize the central bank situation so Bahamians can borrow in U.S. dollars, Swiss francs, or whatever country currency they want to offer. We have to open it up, and we have to open up where a Bahamian can have a bank account in the United States so he can get the tire or whatever he needs without going. And that's where the transformation of this economy has come. We have to open up this economy so if there are Bahamians who have money outside the country, they can bring money back in, keep it in U.S. dollars, and invest it here. That is what you talk about liberalizing. And if they're scared about that, God help us. So, Mr. Speaker, they talked about what is the purpose. This bill is not just by itself. This bill is a compendium of bills. You've seen we've tabled here to do with financial services. The former administration dragged its feet on the multilateral or the bilateral approach to financial services. We almost got blacklisted again. But fortunately, because of the swift action of the Prime Minister and my colleagues in Cabinet, we were able to say we're going to the multilateral approach. We've been hailed by the international community, and we hope on the 13th they drag their feet. If that's what he's objecting to, that they drag their feet. And they did not make up their mind.
Point of order.
Point of order.
Honorable, the chair recognizes the honourable member for Cat Island, Rum Key, and San Salvador.
Mr. Speaker, right, on the question of the CRS and the regime allowed jurisdictions to decide whether they're going to go or adopt what is called the bilateral approach or the multilateral approach. That's what the regime allowed. Right? The advice to this government, our government at the time, was that we should go the bilateral route. And that's what we adopted. There was no dragging of any feet. We adopted, Mr. Speaker, we adopted what we was, right? We then, Mr. Speaker, and we concluded that, Mr. Speaker, no, it's wrong. Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member.
Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member. Honourable member.
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
I gave you the opportunity to make a statement, but what I'm saying is, I permitted you to make a statement that was really not a point of order. It was really not a point of order, but I permitted you
misleading about us
to make a point.
But you're saying that we were dislaying, and that was wrong. That's the point.
But you can only rise on a point of order for clarification on something that you said.
Would you yield? Okay, please do.
What the honourable member from Salvador is saying is the advice that they got was they could go with bilateral approaches, but there was a requirement to have a certain number of these bilaterals signed by a certain, not TIAs. So therefore they had that option, but they had to do it by a certain time period. The time ran out to execute those agreements, and therefore by the dragging of the feet, it left us no opportunity but to sign the multilateral approach, which we did very closely. So there's no point of order on this, because that is absolutely correct. That is absolutely. So we signed the multilateral agreement, and we are now going to be. Let me just. It's no. We are now going in December of this year. We have been invited to go to Europe to sign with the OECD to bring the Bahamas current, so we're not the only one in this jurisdiction that hasn't gone the multilateral. So whether you want to call that dragging their feet, they did not get around to signing enough bilaterals, in the time required to have it. And that is a fact. There is no disagreement. I agree with him that the advice they got was right, and they took that. No. Just like your member didn't need, I'm not going to yield because that's the fact. You can deal with it outside the House. You see, they did not. That is the facts. That is the facts. That is.
Honourable member.
You can.
What is your point of order, honourable member?
Is that the insistence that our jurisdiction go multilateral was put in place only late last year, and then the financial services got together to determine what they would advise us. Right, the advice came back that if we were to sign, I think it was 50 or 60 multilateral agreements before June of this year, I think was the period of time, then we would be able to maintain the multilateral. Now, the time did not permit for that to happen. There was a drag of feet. Look, other countries
honourable member
required the two countries to sign.
They did not reach
the time run out.
The time didn't run out. Mr. Speaker, they did not get around to signing 50 or number before they time ran out. But you know what? It ain't gonna run out of me. I'll give you another example. There's a base erosion profit sharing, shifting, BEPS, all these initiatives. They had the opportunity to sit on a committee to steer it. They didn't reply.
Didn't even answer.
Didn't reply, didn't answer. To sit on a steering committee, to drive BEPS. So now we get a requirement. We have to decide by a certain period of time which, by the end of the year, which of the 15 articles we're going to accept, and we have to accept a minimum of 4 or 5. So therefore, that was another example. They dragged their feet. We missed the boat. So at some point, it cannot be business as usual, and that is why we were elected. They question about the question of whether BIA, Bahamas Investment Board, is functioning properly. It can do better. The member for Killarney has plans for that. That's going to change also. But one of the key issues, for instance, when I was down in Singapore, we looked at the whole question of computerizing of the government system. The FNM and its former administration brought part of the Singapore government up here. We got a certain level up of computerization, and it hasn't gone that much further. There's been some progress. But we need to change the whole IT system of the way that Bahamas does government, and breaking down of these silos, like I just talked about, is a key important issue, because you can't be producing a birth certificate here and a birth certificate there and a financial statement here. They need to be done electronically within the business. Eventually this Parliament should be electronically, and that's where we have to go. So that's where we're going. So the whole question then there was a question of removing the consideration whether or not staff are available. I've already addressed that issue because that will be done in the pre-stages of the whole issue. Some of these issues I'm just trying to deal with as they brought up. There's an immigration issue that you get a immigration permit for 3 years. Let me just solve one problem. For years, we have been issuing immigration work permits for 3 years. We've been getting away from 1 year, so you get 3 years. You can either pay for 3 years now, pay for a year to go. But for years, we've been issuing 3 years. But the point that got missed in the translation, or might not have been understood in the translation, the business is approved every year. If the business fails, the work permit ceases because it is tied to the business. So when you see some changes coming in the immigration law in terms of what people can work for what, and penalties as a result of that, those persons relying on that 3-year work permit, not working for the business because its certificate did not get approved by the government, will be in breach of the immigration law and subject to a fine and or imprisonment. That's the law today. So therefore, business fails, work permit goes away. So the fact is 3 years for the work permit is irrelevant when the 1 year permit, the business goes away. But we talked about immigration. I've said here many times we have to look at immigration. Look at the Cayman model of immigration. I'll give you one example. Singapore. Singapore, you can come in for, I think, 6 years, 2-3 year periods. And when you leave, you cannot come back in the same capacity that you left in. So if you left as a secretary, you better come back as a director, otherwise you ain't coming back in. And we have to look at all of that, because we have been very lax. We have given people work permits for years and years and years. And let's not talk about capacity building, because there are people that came in to build Atlantis Hotel that are still here working in the construction industry.
Table. And 5, what amount is the person being paid for housing allowance?
Order that the notice be brought up. Order that the notice do lie on the table. Further notices for future meetings. Sorry.
Yes. I have a question. Will the
Chair
Minister...
recognizes the Honourable Member for Angleston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Minister of Finance advise whether any policy initiatives were undertaken or promised in procuring the reported lending in his recent travel?
Order that the question be brought up.
In the reported recent, I said lending by the third parties or borrowings by the Bahamas. Will the Minister of Finance advise whether any promises were made on policy initiatives to procure the reported borrowing?
Order that the notice be brought up.
Just answer it. Just say if it's not true.
You ain't tell me about that. You ain't tell me about that.
Okay. I just don't okay. I just give you something, give it right back to me.
Order that the question do lie on the table.
I'll do that.
Further notices for the future meeting.
Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for South and Central Andros. Honourable Member for South and Central Andros. Are we also to include Mangrove Key?
Yes, please.
Because that is left off your...
Yes, I would be most grateful if the member for Carmichael, as a man who has roots in the community of Andros, would be so gracious as to add Mangrove Key somewhere on this great insignia in this honor.
What do you got to do? You didn't do this, did
He did it. He did it.
No, the prison. They came to prison.
Yes, the Chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Carmichael.
Honourable Member for South Andros and Mangrove Key is a very, very dear friend of mine. I would never short him if I had anything to do with his site.
Real friend. We had our UE days together. Mr. Speaker, all notices standing in the name of Her Majesty's loyal opposition be so continued. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Notices for future meetings.
Mr. Speaker, I stand to renew all matters in the name of the Government of the Bahamas and to inform the House that we will adjourn until November the 29th, 10 a.m., 2017.
Is there a second? It has been moved and seconded that the business of this House do adjourn until Wednesday, the 29th of November at 10 a.m. All those who are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. the 29th of November, 2017.